Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if a godlike Naruto was the reincarnation of chaos itself? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sound of a Broken String. The silence was the first thing that had started to unnerve Kakashi. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a team in sync, but a heavy, watchful stillness that emanated from the blonde boy walking at the center of their formation. Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox, the dead last of his class, and the self-proclaimed future Hokage, was supposed to be a maelstrom of noise and boisterous energy. He was supposed to be complaining about the length of the journey, arguing with Sasuke, or trying to impress Sakura with some harebrained antic. Instead, he walked with an unnerving economy of motion, his blue eyes sweeping across the forest with a placid, almost detached curiosity. The vibrant orange jumpsuit he insisted on wearing should have made him a beacon, an easy target. Yet, somehow, it felt like the forest itself was trying to obscure him, the dappled sunlight bending around his shoulders in a way that defied the eye. For the past 3 days, since leaving the gates of Konoha, Naruto hadn't initiated a single conversation. He answered when spoken to, his voice even and calm, but the explosive personality that had defined him was simply gone. Sakura, ever sensitive to the group's dynamics, kept glancing between Naruto and Sasuke, her brow furrowed with a confusion that mirrored Kakashi's own. Sasuke, on the other hand, was a taut wire of irritation. He had built his entire worldview around being the best, the prodigy, the avenger who would surpass his legendary brother. His rival was meant to be Naruto, the loudmouthed idiot who pushed him through sheer, idiotic persistence. But this quiet, observant Naruto was an unknown quantity, a variable that Sasuke's analytical mind couldn't solve, and it grated on him more than any shouted challenge ever could. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura finally broke the quiet, her voice a little too loud. Are you sure we're going the right way? This path doesn't seem very well traveled. Kakashi offered her an eye smile, a practiced gesture of reassurance that felt hollow even to him. Don't worry, Sakura. The land of waves is just across the sea. We're taking a slightly less direct route for security. Our client is a bridge builder, after all. Important people can make powerful enemies. He was speaking to her, but his gaze was fixed on a puddle in the middle of the road ahead. It hadn't rained in a week. A child's trap, but an effective one. He subtly shifted his weight, preparing for the inevitable ambush. As they drew level with it, he watched Naruto's head tilt, his gaze lingering on the water. For a fraction of a second longer than it should have, there was no flicker of recognition, no sign that he'd spotted the deception. It was something else, a flicker of interest. 2 figures erupted from the water, chains with wicked gauntlets spinning through the air. First target acquired, one of them growled, the chain whipping directly toward Naruto. Kakashi moved in a blur, his own kunai ready to intercept. Sasuke's hand flew to his pouch, the Sharingan he didn't yet possess burning as an phantom itch behind his eyes. But before either of them could act, something impossible happened. The lead Chunin, the one called Mizu, took his final step to launch his attack, and his sandal simply disintegrated. Not torn, not cut, but turned to dust and gravel beneath his foot. His ankle twisted with an audible crack, his momentum sending him tumbling forward not into an attack, but into a clumsy, sprawling fall. His brother, Gozu, faltered for a critical second, his surprise breaking his concentration. The spinning chain wobbled in its arc, and the metal gauntlet, instead of wrapping around their target, snagged on a low-hanging branch, a branch that hadn't been there a moment before. The sudden stop nearly ripped Gozu's arm from its socket, and he stumbled, his carefully planned pincer attack utterly ruined. In that heartbeat of chaos, Kakashi was already behind them. 2 sharp strikes to the back of their necks, and the demon brothers from Kurigakure were unconscious before they hit the ground. Silence descended once more, thicker and more profound than before. Sakura stared, wide-eyed, at the fallen ninja, then at the branch that had caught the chain, then at the pile of dust that used to be a sandal. Sasuke's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked at Naruto, who hadn't moved an inch. The boy was still watching the scene with that same calm, placid expression, as if he were observing a mildly interesting play. Lucky break, Kakashi said, his voice straining to sound casual. He tied the two chunin to a nearby tree, his mind racing. It wasn't a lucky break. It was a statistical impossibility. A sandal doesn't just turn to dust. A branch doesn't just happen to be in the perfect position to snag a weapon that should have been a killing blow. It was wrong. The world had bent, just for a second, around Naruto Uzumaki. He turned to his team. Tazuna-san, he called out to their client, who was trembling behind them. It seems you have some explaining to do. This was no ordinary bandit attack. These are chunin from the village hidden in the mist. The bridge builder, Tazuna, launched into a tearful, desperate confession about a shipping magnate named Gato, a tyrant who controlled the land of waves through fear and economic strangulation. He'd lied on the mission request, booking a simple C-rank escort mission because he couldn't afford the A-rank price that came with expecting ninja opposition. Sakura was indignant, arguing they should return to the village as the mission was outside their scope. Sasuke was silent, but his gaze kept flicking to Naruto, a storm of calculation and suspicion in his dark eyes. It was Naruto who finally spoke, his voice cutting through the debate with quiet authority. We'll continue the mission. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. Kakashi looked at him, searching for the bravado, the reckless desire to prove himself. He found none. Naruto's eyes were clear, his posture relaxed. It was the simple, unshakable confidence of someone who has already seen the outcome. Naruto is right, Sasuke said suddenly, shocking Sakura. We can't back down now. It would be a disgrace. His reasoning was a thin veneer over his real motive. He needed to see more. He needed to understand the impossible thing he had just witnessed. Kakashi sighed, a genuine weariness settling over him. He knew they should return. It was protocol. It was the smart thing to do. But looking at Naruto, he felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if they were all caught in a current, and the quiet blonde boy was the only one who knew where it was flowing. All right, he said, sealing their fate. But we'll need to be on high alert. The next one they send won't be a chunin. His words proved prophetic, as their boat cut through the thick, unnatural mist that blanketed the waters approaching wave country. The oppressive feeling of being watched intensified. The boatman, a nervous local, kept his head down, rowing with frantic energy. This mist is heavy, Sakura whispered, her hand resting on a kunai in her pouch. It's infused with chakra, Sasuke noted, his eyes scanning the water. Naruto said nothing. He simply trailed a hand in the water, his fingers leaving a wake that seemed brighter, clearer than the murky depths around it. Where his hand passed, the mist thinned, swirling away from him as if repelled by an unseen force. Kakashi saw it. He saw the way the dense fog, a key component of many of Kuritaker's assassination techniques, refused to touch his student. Then, a shape loomed in the fog. A man, standing casually on the surface of the water, his body wrapped in bandages and a massive blade strapped to his back. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist. Well, Zabuza's voice was a low, menacing rasp that cut through the fog. If it isn't Kakashi of the Sharingan, I'll have to ask you to hand over the bridge builder. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed. Team 7, Protection Formation Delta. Protect the client. His students moved instantly, surrounding Tazuna. But Kakashi's focus was on the subtle war being waged around them. Zabuza's hidden mist jutsu was legendary, a technique that disoriented and blinded his opponents. Yet, in the 10-foot radius around Naruto, the mist remained stubbornly thin, creating a small island of clarity in the oppressive white. Zabuza noticed it too, a slight tilt of his bandaged head betraying his confusion. You've brought some interesting brats with you, Kakashi, Zabuza commented, his eyes lingering on Naruto. One of them seems to dislike my technique. He didn't wait for a reply. In a flash, he was on their boat, his massive executioner's blade swinging for Tazuna. Kakashi intercepted with a kunai, the screech of metal on metal deafening. The two jonin engaged in a taijutsu battle that was a blur of motion. Their speed and power far beyond anything the genin had ever witnessed. Zabuza disengaged, landing back on the water. Water style. Water prison jutsu. A sphere of water materialized around Kakashi, trapping him completely. It was a perfect, inescapable prison. Clones made of water emerged from the surface, their soulless eyes fixed on the remaining members of Team 7. Now, brats, Zabuza's voice echoed from the mist. It's time for your lesson to end. Permanently. The clones surged forward. Sasuke fought with a desperate, elegant fury, his fireballs hissing into steam as they hit the water clones. Buying him precious seconds, Sakura stood her ground, guarding Tazuna with a kunai clutched in a white-knuckled grip. And Naruto just watched. He watched the water clone approaching him, its arm morphing into a sharp blade. He didn't raise his hands to form a seal. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just stood there, his expression unchanged. As the clone swung, Naruto took a single, deliberate step to the side. The clone's watery limb passed through the space he had just occupied, but it didn't continue its arc. Instead, it collapsed. The water that formed its body lost all cohesion, splashing into the bottom of the boat with the inert finality of a spilled bucket. Another clone came at him from the side. Naruto raised a hand, not to block, but with his palm open. The clone dissolved 3 feet away from him, its form unraveling in midair. Zabuza's voice was laced with disbelief. What is this? What are you doing, boy? From within the prison, Kakashi's eyes were wide with shock. He felt it too. The water prison around him was unstable. The chakra holding the sphere together felt frayed, like a rope being picked apart thread by thread. Tiny ripples, not caused by his own movements, were appearing on its surface. The water felt thin, less dense. He pushed against the wall of his prison, and to his astonishment, it gave way slightly. The structure groaning like stressed metal. It shouldn't have been possible. On the boat, Sasuke saw his opening. While the clones hesitated, thrown into confusion by the bizarre phenomenon around Naruto, he acted. Naruto. The plan. It was a bluff, a desperate gambit to create a coordinated attack. Naruto turned his head, his placid blue eyes meeting Sasuke's. For a moment, Sasuke felt a jolt, a dizzying sensation of looking into something ancient and vast. Then Naruto nodded. He and Sasuke threw their shuriken with perfect timing. Sasuke's were a feint, easily dodged by Zabuza. But Naruto's flew differently. They didn't seem to spin with the same velocity, yet they cut through the air with a strange, unerring purpose. One of them transformed mid-flight, a shadow shuriken, hidden beneath the first. It was a basic academy trick, but Zabuza, his attention fractured by the inexplicable failure of his jutsu, was a fraction of a second too slow to react. He was forced to leap away, breaking his concentration and his hold on the water prison. Kakashi was free. The fight turned decisively. Kakashi, his Sharingan now unveiled, began to systematically dismantle Zabuza's arsenal, copying his water-based jutsu and turning them against him. The demon of the mist, already unnerved by the quiet genin who seemed to passively negate his techniques, was put on the defensive. The final clash came. Kakashi copied Zabuza's water dragon jutsu seal for seal, a perfect mirror image. But as the two massive dragons of water rose to collide, the one summoned by Zabuza seemed to falter. Its form flickered, its roar dying in its throat before it was utterly annihilated by Kakashi's attack. Zabuza was sent flying, crashing into a tree on the shoreline. Before Kakashi could deliver the final blow, 2 Senbon needles sprouted from Zabuza's neck. A figure appeared on the branch above, a hunter nin from Kurigakure, their face hidden behind a white mask. "Thank you," the hunter nin said, their voice light and feminine, though clearly disguised. "I have been tracking Zabuza for some time. It is my duty to dispose of the body." Kakashi cautiously approached, checking Zabuza for vital signs. He found none. "I see," he said, a sliver of doubt in his mind. But he was drained, and his students were at their limit. He allowed the hunter nin to take the body and vanish in a swirl of leaves. As the mist finally cleared, the team gathered on the shore, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind exhaustion and a profound sense of unease. "He wasn't a hunter nin," Sasuke said, his voice low. "Hunter nin destroy the body on sight to protect the village's secrets. And those Senbon, they're meant to induce a death-like state, not kill." "I know," Kakashi admitted, his gaze falling once again on Naruto. "Zabuza is alive, and his partner is likely a very skilled shinobi." They escorted a shaken Tazuna back to his home, where they were met by his daughter, Tsunami, and his young grandson, Inari. The house was humble, but it was a refuge. As they settled in, the weight of the day's events pressed down on them. That evening, Kakashi put the genin through a chalk. Raw control exercise. Tree climbing without hands. Sakura, with her excellent control, mastered it within an hour. Sasuke, through sheer talent and stubborn pride, managed it by dusk, collapsing in exhaustion at the top of a trunk. Naruto approached a tree. He didn't seem to concentrate or gather his chakra. He simply placed a foot on the trunk and walked. 1 step, 2 steps, all the way to the highest branch. Where he stood perfectly balanced, looking out over the forest as if he'd been doing it his entire life. There was no surge of chakra, no trial and error. Just effortless, perfect control that he shouldn't have possessed. Sasuke watched from the ground, his fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed that what he was seeing was impossible. The Dobi, the failure, had not only shown a bizarre passive defense in battle but now displayed chakra control that rivaled, or even surpassed, his own. It wasn't just about being better anymore. This was about understanding how Naruto was breaking the rules of their world. Later that week, while the others recovered, Naruto took to walking in the woods surrounding Tezuna's home. It was there he met the masked ninja again. The boy, for he was clearly a boy, gathering medicinal herbs in a small basket, was Haku. Haku did not recognize Naruto at first, not without his headband. But he felt it, a profound emptiness in the natural energy of the forest. Where Naruto stood, the vibrant hum of life, the flow of chakra from the earth and trees, was muted, as if a patch of reality had been wiped clean. "You are not from around here," Haku said, his voice soft. The modulator he used as a hunter nin absent. "We're protecting someone," Naruto replied, his gaze not on Haku, but on a bird nesting in a branch above them. As he watched, a second egg, then a third, appeared in the nest, a biological impossibility that happened in the space of a heartbeat. Haku's breath hitched. He had seen it. His senses, honed by years of training and his unique ice-based Kekkei Genkai, were more attuned to the subtle flows of energy than most. He felt the ripple in the world, the quiet snap of causality. It terrified him on a level deeper than any physical threat. "Do you have someone precious to you?" Naruto asked, his question seemingly coming from nowhere. His blue eyes finally turned to Haku, and for a second, Haku felt like he was falling into a starless sky. "Yes," Haku answered honestly, his mind filled with the image of Zabuza. "I do." "Then you should protect them," Naruto said simply. He then turned and walked away, leaving Haku trembling. Not from fear of a threat, but from contact with a power that felt ancient and utterly alien. The day came, as Kakashi knew it would. They escorted Tezuna to the bridge, a massive, half-finished structure that was the physical embodiment of Wave's hope. And there, waiting for them in the swirling mist, were Zabuza and Haku. "It seems you're still alive, Kakashi," Zabuza drawled, his bandages gone, revealing a scarred, determined face. "But this time, I won't be holding back. And I brought my little trump card." The battle began in earnest. Kakashi immediately engaged Zabuza, their fight a maelstrom of steel and water jutsu that kept them separated from the others. Sasuke, his pride burning, squared off against Haku. "This one is mine," he declared. Sakura stayed with Tezuna, kunai at the ready, her role purely defensive. Naruto stood back, a silent observer to the unfolding conflict. Sasuke fought brilliantly. He pushed Haku hard, his developing skills and Uchiha talent on full display. But Haku was faster, more precise. He lured Sasuke into a trap. Secret jutsu. Demonic ice crystal mirrors. An array of mirrors made of ice formed a dome around Sasuke, trapping him inside. Haku's reflection appeared in every single one. He moved between them at impossible speeds, a phantom of ice and Senbon needles. Sasuke couldn't keep up. Needles pierced his arms, his legs, slowing him, draining him. Naruto watched the dome of ice, his head tilted. He could feel the intricate web of chakra that held the jutsu together. It was elegant, ordered, and precise. It was everything his own nature was not. He started walking toward it. Sakura cried out, "Naruto, no. It's a trap." He didn't listen. As he approached the dome, Sasuke, riddled with needles, finally collapsed. Haku appeared before him. Senbon held ready for a final, mercifully quick strike to the neck. And then Naruto stepped inside the dome. He didn't break a mirror. He didn't force his way in. He simply passed through the wall of ice as if it were a curtain of smoke. Haku froze, his eyes wide with shock behind his mask. That was impossible. The mirrors were a closed, physical space. No one could enter from the outside. How? Haku whispered. Naruto didn't answer. He looked down at Sasuke's still form, at the needles that made him look like a pincushion. He felt no rage, no surge of the fox's chakra that Jiraiya had warned him about. He felt only a profound sense of wrongness. This outcome was incorrect. This ordered, predictable result of a superior technique winning was an offense to the boundless, unpredictable nature of existence itself. And so, reality complied. It started with a sound. Not a loud crack, but a low hum, like a string on a massive, cosmic instrument being plucked and then snapping. The reflection of Haku in the mirror behind Naruto flickered, the image distorting as if seen through a heat haze. Haku felt a tremor run through his jutsu, a vibration that had no physical source. He tried to move, to leap to another mirror, but his connection to them felt sluggish, the flow of his chakra turning to sludge. My mirrors, he breathed in horror. The mirror to Naruto's left developed a hairline crack. But the crack didn't spread outward. Instead, it glowed with a faint, black light, and the ice around it began to dissolve, not melting into water, but sublimating into nothingness. The very concept of ice was being unwritten in that spot. Another mirror began to warp, the reflection of Sasuke's body stretching and twisting into an unrecognizable shape. The space within the mirrors, the link that allowed Haku to travel between them, was breaking down. He felt a nauseating vertigo, as if the world were tilting on its axis. Stop! Haku cried out, a genuine plea of terror in his voice. He threw a volley of Senbon at Naruto. They flew through the air, and then, inches from their target, they simply ceased to be. They didn't fall, they didn't deflect. They vanished from existence. Naruto looked up, his calm blue eyes meeting Haku's. It's over, he said. With a final, discordant shriek of stressed reality, the demonic ice crystal mirrors shattered. They didn't break into shards of ice. They dissolved into a shower of black dust and shimmering, heatless light, the entire jutsu collapsing on a fundamental, conceptual level. Haku was thrown to the ground, his chakra network in agonizing revolt from the catastrophic failure of his technique. He was defenseless, broken. At the other end of the bridge, the shockwave of the jutsu's collapse momentarily stunned Zabuza, giving Kakashi the opening he needed. He summoned his Ninken, his pack of ninja hounds, who pinned Zabuza in place. Kakashi's hand crackled with lightning. The Chidori, a killing blow. He charged, but Haku saw it. With the last of his strength, he used a body flicker technique, appearing directly in the path of Kakashi's lightning-wreathed hand. The sound of the Chidori piercing flesh was sickeningly wet. Zabuza's eyes widened in shock. Haku, his most precious person, collapsed, a gaping hole in his chest. And then, as if the day held one more cruel twist, a new figure appeared at the end of the bridge. A short, impeccably dressed man flanked by hundreds of hired thugs and mercenaries. Gato. Well, Zabuza, the shipping magnate sneered, clapping mockingly. You've outlived your usefulness. The demon of the mist is just too expensive. I decided to bring my own army to finish the job. Kill them all. The ninja, the bridge builder, everyone. The thugs laughed, their confidence bolstered by their sheer numbers. Zabuza stood frozen, looking down at Haku's body, his world shattered. Kakashi was exhausted, his Chidori having taken the last of his usable chakra. Sakura was terrified, trying to shield Tazuna. The army of mercenaries charged forward, a wave of crude weapons and bloodlust. But they faltered. The first rank of thugs, their feet pounding on the bridge, suddenly tripped. They didn't trip over debris or their own feet. They tripped over nothing. A dozen men went down in a chaotic tangle of limbs. The men behind them, unable to stop, crashed into them. A mercenary swung a rusted sword at Tazuna. The blade, old and poorly maintained, snapped in half mid-swing, the jagged edge flying backward and embedding its LF in the shoulder of the man next to him. Another thug drew a bow, but the string, dry and brittle, chose that exact moment to break with a sharp crack. Panic and confusion began to ripple through their ranks. Their charge slowed to a confused, stumbling walk. They were a force of predictable, brutish order, and they were walking into a field of pure chaos. Naruto stood over Sasuke's body. He placed a hand on his teammate's chest. There was a faint flicker of light, and Sasuke's eyes shot open with a gasp, the Senbon needles falling from his body as if pushed out from within, clattering onto the bridge. Then Naruto turned to face the mob. He didn't shout. He didn't make a grand gesture. He simply met their gaze, and in his calm, blue eyes, the thugs saw an emptiness that promised not pain or death, but utter non-existence. They saw the end of all things. It was Zabuza who moved first. He snatched a kunai from Haku's lifeless hand. Tears streamed down his face. "You were always at my side," he whispered. "The least I can do is be at your side in the end." With a roar of pure, undiluted rage, he charged not at Kakashi, but straight into the heart of Gado's army. He was a demon unleashed, cutting a bloody path toward the man who had used and discarded his only reason for living. The sight of the legendary Zabuza turning on his former employer, combined with the inexplicable, unnerving chaos that was breaking down their advance, shattered the mercenaries' morale completely. They broke ranks and fled. Zabuza, grievously wounded but triumphant, reached Gado and ended the tyrant's life with a final, desperate strike. Then, he collapsed, his body finally succumbing to his injuries. He died beside Haku, a faint, content smile on his lips. In the silence that followed, as the sun began to set over the completed bridge, no one knew what to say. Kakashi looked at his team, a revived Sasuke, a trembling Sakura, and Naruto, who stood as a calm, silent epicenter to the impossibilities they had all witnessed. He had no words, no frame of reference for what his student was. It wasn't the fox. It was something older, something stranger. Weeks later, as they prepared to leave, the newly named Great Naruto Bridge stood as a symbol of the land's freedom. The people of Wave cheered for them as heroes. But Team 7 was quiet. The bond between them had changed. The rivalry and camaraderie were now tainted with awe, confusion, and a sliver of fear. As they walked the path back toward the land of fire, none of them noticed the lone fisherman packing up his gear by the shore. He hadn't been fishing. He had been watching. He pulled a small, featureless wooden bird from his pack and channeled a tiny amount of chakra into it. Its eyes glowed for a moment. He spoke to it in a low, coded language. "The anomaly in Konoha has been confirmed. Containment protocols have failed. Causality is unstable. The sound is wrong. I saw a jutsu unmade. I repeat, unmade. Requesting the dispatch of a weaver. The string is broken." The wooden bird took flight, soaring silently into the sky, carrying its impossible message back to an organization that had waited centuries for this very day. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Unseen Move. The journey back to Konohagakure was a study in suffocating silence. The easy camaraderie that had been fragile, yet present on the way to Wave Country, was now gone. Replaced by a thick, unspoken tension that clung to them like the humid summer air. Sasuke walked with a rigid, controlled fury, his dark eyes constantly flicking towards Naruto, no longer with simple annoyance, but with a predatory, analytical intensity. He was a hawk watching a creature he couldn't classify, trying to discern if it was prey or a god. Sakura tried, twice, to bridge the silence with cheerful inanities about shopping and dango, but her words fell like stones into a deep well, and she eventually retreated into a worried quiet, her gaze bouncing between two boys as if she were waiting for an explosion. And Naruto was the well. He walked with the same unhurried, placid grace he had shown on the bridge. He didn't seem to notice the fear, the suspicion, the raw, gnawing curiosity he was creating. He simply existed within it, an island of calm in the turbulent sea of his team's emotions. When they passed through the gates of Konoha, the familiar sights and sounds of home offered no relief. The village felt different, or perhaps, they were different within it. Kakashi's report to the third Hokage was a masterpiece of obfuscation. He detailed the mission's escalation from C to A rank, the betrayal by Gado, the defeat of Zabuza Momochi. But when it came to the specifics, his language became frustratingly vague. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat behind his desk, the smoke from his pipe curling towards the ceiling like a silent question. You say Team 7 defeated him, Kakashi. A Jonin of Zabuza's caliber, along with a highly skilled accomplice. That is, an extraordinary accomplishment for a team of fresh genin. They exceeded all expectations, Lord Hokage, Kakashi said, his single eye staring at a point on the wall just past Hiruzen's shoulder. Sasuke displayed remarkable tactical thinking and skill. Sakura showed immense courage in protecting the client. And Naruto, Hiruzen prompted, his old eyes sharp and perceptive. His file is filled with reports of boisterousness, lack of focus. I find it difficult to imagine him contributing effectively in a battle of that level. Kakashi paused. He could see it again in his mind's eye. The water clones dissolving, the Senbon vanishing mid-flight, the entire, impossible collapse of Haku's demonic ice mirrors. How could he report that? The boy's presence seems to unravel ninjutsu. Reality bends to his favor. He would be sent to the mental ward. Naruto has matured, Kakashi said, the words tasting like ash. He has developed an unconventional but highly effective fighting style. He creates opportunities. There was a significant element of luck involved in our victory. Unnatural luck. Hiruzen drew on his pipe, his gaze unwavering. He knew Kakashi was hiding something profound. But he also trusted the man he'd once mentored. I see. Very well. Dismissed. Take a few days off. You've all earned it. The days that followed were a strange limbo. The village celebrated Team 7 as heroes who had accomplished an A- rank mission. Their fellow rookies, Kiba, Shino, Choji, Shikamaru, looked at them with a new respect, mingled with disbelief. But within the team itself, the fracture widened. Sasuke became a ghost. He was either training with a ferocious, almost self-destructive intensity, or he was shadowing Naruto. He would watch him from rooftops as Naruto watered the single, sad-looking plant on his apartment's windowsill. He would observe him from across the training ground as Naruto practiced taijutsu against a stump, his movements fluid and precise but lacking any of the explosive power one would expect from a Jinchuriki. Sasuke saw no evidence of the Nine Tails chakra, no sign of any secret training. He just saw a boy who seemed to move through the world as if he'd already read the script. It was maddening. One afternoon, Naruto sat at Ichiraku Ramen, a bowl of miso ramen before him. Chuki, the owner, was wiping down the counter. Quiet these days, Naruto, Chuki said, his voice warm. You used to come in here yelling about becoming Hokage. Now, you just eat. Naruto looked up from his noodles, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Things change, he said simply. He took a bite, and as he did, a fly that had been buzzing annoyingly around Chuki's head for the last 5 minutes abruptly dropped from the air, dead. Neither of them noticed. It was in the village library that he first truly spoke with Hinata Hyuga. He was browsing a dusty section on the history of the Uzumaki clan, a sect. Ion that contained little more than a few scattered references to their sealing jutsu and their eventual destruction. He wasn't learning, so much as absorbing the information, the words and diagrams. Making an intuitive sense that defied study. He felt a presence nearby and turned. Hinata stood a few aisles away, ostensibly looking at a scroll on medicinal herbs, but her pale, lavender eyes were fixed on him. She wasn't staring with the fear or suspicion he was growing accustomed to. It was a look of intense, gentle curiosity. When their eyes met, she didn't flinch or look away as she once would have. She gave a small, hesitant bow. Naruto inclined his head in return. A comfortable silence settled between them. It was different from the tense quiet of his team. This was a shared space, not a divided one. I heard about your mission, Hinata said, her voice a soft murmur that barely disturbed the library's dust. It was very brave. We did what we had to do, Naruto replied. Quote, my father says that bravery is not enough in our world, she continued, her fingers tracing the spine of a scroll. He says that power is what matters. That the Hyuga's gentle fist is an absolute defense, an unbreakable order. She paused, then looked at him again, a question in her luminous eyes. Do you believe that some things are unbreakable? The question hung in the air. He thought of Haku's mirrors. A jutsu built on perfect, ordered precision, and how they had simply ceased to be. Nothing is unbreakable, Naruto said, his voice quiet but certain. Things just are, until they aren't. A small, genuine smile touched Hinata's lips. It was a revelatory expression, one that lit up her face. I think I understand. She saw him. She didn't understand what he was, but she saw the core of him. The part that existed outside the definitions of shinobi, of Jinchuriki, of failure or hero. She saw a truth, and she was not afraid of it. In that moment, Naruto felt a connection, a single, stable point in a world that was beginning to feel fluid and strange around him. The announcement of the Chunin exams shattered the village's brief period of peace. Jonin senseis from every team gathered to nominate their students. Asuma Sarutobi, nominate Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi. Kurenai Yuhi, nominate Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, and Hinata Hyuga. When it was Kakashi's turn, a heavy silence fell. Kakashi Hatake, nominate Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Naruto Uzumaki. Iruka, his former academy instructor, shot to his feet. Kakashi, what are you thinking? The others have all completed at least 8 C-rank missions. Team 7 has only completed 1. And yes, it was an A- rank in scope, but they aren't ready for this. Especially Naruto. He was the worst student in his class. Kakashi's eye didn't waver. Iruka, your concern comes from a good place. But they are ready. Sasuke has the best skills of all the rookies. Sakura has the sharpest mind. And Naruto, he trailed off. His gaze becoming distant. Has the most unpredictable potential for growth I have ever seen. The Hokage stamped the nomination forms. It was settled. The FIRST part of the exam was a written test designed by Ibiki Morino, the head of Konoha's torture and interrogation force. It was a test of information gathering, not knowledge. The questions were impossibly difficult for a genin. The true test was to cheat without getting caught. Sakura finished it easily. Sasuke used his developing visual prowess to copy the movements of another candidate's pen. But Naruto just sat there. He read the first question. Decipher the following coded message and determine the trajectory and range of the projectile described. It was gibberish to him. He didn't know the code, the formulas. He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, the symbols on the page seemed to rearrange themselves in his mind. The answer wasn't calculated, it simply emerged. A trajectory of 42.7 degrees. A range of 1.3 kilometers. He wrote it down. He did the same for every question. He didn't know the answers, but the correct information presented itself to him as the only logical possibility. He finished the test in 20 minutes, his paper filled with perfect, concise answers. He then put his head down and went to sleep. Ibiki watched him from the front of the room. A deep sense of unease crawling up his spine. The boy showed no stress, no anxiety, no flicker of deception. He felt none of the psychological pressure that was Ibiki's stock and trade. It was like trying to interrogate the wind. It was profoundly unnerving. When the 10th question was revealed to be a test of courage, to stay or to leave, Naruto didn't even stir, his calm refusal to quit more absolute than any shouted declaration. They passed. And then came the second stage, held in the 44th training ground, a place better known as the Forest of Death. Enko Mitarashi, the proctor, was a whirlwind of manic energy and barely concealed danger. All right, maggots, she yelled, a sadistic grin on her face. The rules are simple. You get 1 heaven scroll and 1 earth scroll. You need to get both and make it to the tower in the center within 5 days. And try not to get eaten. As they stood before the gate, waiting to begin, Sasuke's gaze was locked on Naruto. Don't get in my way, Dobi, he hissed, his voice low. I'm going to find strong opponents and I'm going to test my strength. I need to see what real power is. Naruto simply looked at him. Be careful you don't find something you can't handle, Sasuke. The moment the gates opened, they were plunged into a world of primal danger. Within the first hour, they were attacked by a team from the Hidden Rain village. Their genjutsu was subtle, a disorienting mist that made the trees seem to warp and twist. Sakura fell for it immediately, but for Naruto, the illusion was a transparent, flimsy thing laid over the solid truth of the world. He walked right through it. The Rain Nin stared in disbelief as he appeared before them, seemingly immune. Sasuke, breaking the genjutsu with a painful burst of chakra, finished T. Hem with a brutal efficiency that was borderline terrifying. He took their scroll and tossed it aside. It was a heaven scroll, the same as theirs. Useless. Days passed in a blur of near misses and strange luck. A giant tiger that was stalking them was suddenly and inexplicably crushed by a falling branch from a perfectly healthy tree. A venomous snake that lunged for Sakura bit its own tongue and died. A pitfall trap they were about to walk into was triggered by a single falling leaf, revealing its location. Sasuke's frustration grew with each incident. He wanted a fight, a real challenge, the forest itself seemed to be conspiring to keep them safe, all because of the quiet boy at the center of their formation. On the third day, it happened. A gust of wind, unnaturally strong and cold, tore through the canopy. The pressure that descended on them was immense, a killing intent so pure and powerful it felt like a physical weight. Sakura collapsed, trembling. Sasuke drew a kunai, sweat beading on his forehead. His body screaming at him to run. Only Naruto seemed unaffected, his head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. A figure emerged from the shadows. Long black hair, pale skin, and golden eyes with slitted pupils that radiated an ancient, predatory intelligence. Orochimaru of the Sannin. Well, the Sannin hissed, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. I was hoping to find some promising young sprouts. And it seems I've found a particularly interesting one. His gaze was fixed on Sasuke, but a flicker of it kept darting to Naruto, a connoisseur appraising two vastly different, but equally tempting, delicacies. You have the Uchiha eyes, Orochimaru said to Sasuke, his tongue unnaturally long as it darted out to lick his lips. Excellent. But you, his attention shifted fully to Naruto. There is something else about you. An emptiness. A beautiful, chaotic void. The Nine Tails is a loud, garish thing. This is quiet, and so much more powerful. Sasuke, enraged at being dismissed and terrified by the sheer presence of the Sannin, attacked. Fire style. Phoenix flower jutsu. Multiple fireballs shot towards Orochimaru. The Sannin didn't even move. He simply exhaled, and a blast of wind snuffed the flames out as if they were birthday candles. He moved in a blur, his neck stretching to an impossible length, his mouth open to deliver a venomous bite. But as his fangs neared Sasuke, Naruto moved. He didn't do anything spectacular. He simply stepped between them. Orochimaru's fangs stopped an inch from Naruto's shoulder. He couldn't move forward. It wasn't a physical barrier. It felt as if the space between him and Naruto had become infinite. He was pushing, but there was no more distance to cross. A fundamental law of physics had been locally suspended. Fascinating, Orochimaru whispered, his eyes wide with a scientist's manic glee. He pulled back, his form coiling like a serpent. A reality-warping phenomenon centered on a single individual. The potential is limitless. I must have you. I must understand you. He summoned a massive snake, which erupted from the ground and lunged at Naruto. Naruto didn't dodge. He just stood his ground, and the snake, one of Orochimaru's most powerful summons, veered away at the last possible second, crashing through the trees as if it had suddenly become terrified of its target. Orochimaru laughed, a high, unhinged sound. It's not just you. The world itself rejects conflict directed at you. Wonderful. He knew he couldn't capture Naruto through conventional means. The boy's defense was passive, absolute, and incomprehensible. So, he would do the next best thing. He would mark him for later study. And he would take the Uchiha as a consolation prize. His neck stretched again, this time towards a terrified Sasuke. Naruto grabbed Sasuke's tunic, pulling him back. As he did, Orochimaru's fangs sank into Naruto's shoulder instead. Tsutomu spun into existence on the skin, the beginnings of Orochimaru's cursed seal of heaven. A searing pain should have erupted through Naruto's body, a corrupting chakra meant to overwhelm his own and rewrite his will. But it met the void. It was like pouring a cup of water into a black hole. The ordered, intricate seal, a masterpiece of forbidden jutsu, touched the primordial chaos of Naruto's essence and was instantly, violently, unwritten. Orochimaru screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of pure, abject terror. He felt the backlash through the psychic link of his jutsu. It wasn't just that the seal was destroyed, it was that the concept of the seal was being attacked. He felt a searing, Mental agony as he was given a momentary glimpse into Naruto's true nature, an endless, formless, timeless chaos from which all reality was born and to which it would all eventually return. It was the face of God, and it was the face of oblivion. The tomo on Naruto's shoulder twisted, the neat black lines turning into a chaotic, meaningless scribble of scarred tissue before fading away completely, leaving behind only smooth, unbroken skin. Orochimaru stumbled back, clutching his head, his eyes wide with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades: fear. True, existential fear. He looked at Naruto not as a potential vessel, but as an apocalyptic event in human form. He needed to escape. He needed to rethink everything. He performed a hasty substitution, his body melting into mud as a log took his place. Before he vanished completely, he bit down on Sasuke's neck, successfully branding the Uchiha with the cursed seal. It was a messy, rushed application. But it was enough. An anchor for the future. Then he was gone. Silence reigned in the clearing, broken only by Sasuke's agonized screams as the cursed seal took hold, and Sakura's desperate cries. Naruto looked down at his own shoulder, where the seal had been. He felt nothing. No pain. No lingering chakra. Just a strange, cold clarity. He understood, on some intuitive level, what Orochimaru had tried to do. He had tried to put a label on him, to put him in a box. And the box had broken. Enko arrived moments later, drawn by the massive spike in chakra. She found a sobbing Sakura trying to tend to an unconscious Sasuke, and Naruto standing watch, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. She saw the cursed seal on Sasuke's neck and her blood ran cold. She knew that mark. She knew who it belonged to. But it was the area around Naruto that truly disturbed her. The grass was greener, the trees seemed healthier, but there was a distinct lack of any animal life. The insects were silent. The birds had fled. It was a zone of perfect, unnatural peace. As an agent sometimes tasked with observing irregularities for the wardens, her every instinct screamed that this was a nexus point. A place where the rules were different. What happened here? She demanded, her voice tight. Naruto looked at her, and Anko, a woman who prided herself on being fearless, felt a tremor of the same terror Orochimaru had experienced. It was a feeling of being seen, not by a person, but by a concept. We ran into some trouble, Naruto said, his voice even. But it's over now. Limping, carrying an unconscious Sasuke, they finally made it to the tower just as the 5th day was ending. They had the scrolls. They had survived, but they were not the same team that had entered the forest. Sasuke was now branded, his quest for power given a dark and terrible new path. Sakura was traumatized, her understanding of the world shattered. And Naruto, the boy who was the reincarnation of chaos itself, had just met the first person to look into the void and recognize it for what it was. The game had changed. The unseen moves had been made, and the pieces were now set for a conflict that would stretch far beyond the walls of the Chunin exam arena. The Sannin was hunting him, and the Wardens of Order now had an eyewitness account of a fracture in reality. They were coming for him, too. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Silence of the Lambs. The month between the 2nd and 3rd stages of the Chunin exams was a strange, feverish dream for Konoha. The village buzzed with excitement for the upcoming finals. But for those who had been in the forest of death, the air was thick with unspoken dread. Sasuke was sequestered by Kakashi, who was attempting to teach him the Chidori while simultaneously applying a suppression seal to Orochimaru's curse mark, a process that was like trying to cage a feral beast with a paper door. Sakura, having passed the preliminaries by a stroke of luck and the mutual destruction of her opponents, dedicated herself to studying, a desperate attempt to impose intellectual order on a world that had shown itself to be brutally chaotic. And Naruto trained with Jiraiya. The Sannin had appeared in the village with the subtlety of a natural disaster, declaring himself Naruto's new sensei. But their training sessions were bizarre. Jiraiya would demonstrate a jutsu, the Rasengan, a perfect sphere of rotating chakra, the pinnacle of shape manipulation. He would explain the complex theory, the 3 stages of rotation, power, and containment. Naruto would listen patiently, his expression placid. Then he would hold out his hand. He wouldn't focus on the steps. He wouldn't try to replicate the process. He would simply hold the idea. of the Rasengan in his mind, a spinning ball of violent energy. And in his palm, reality would comply. A sphere of churning, destructive power would tear itself into existence. It wasn't the clean, perfect blue of Jiraiya's. It was a chaotic, staticky vortex, shot through with flickers of black and silver, and it made a sound like tearing fabric. The first time he created it, it shredded the tree he was aiming for. Not by grinding it down, but by seeming to erase it from existence layer by layer. Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, one of the most powerful shinobi in the world, could only stare, his jovial demeanor replaced by a profound unease. He had felt the Nine Tails chakra before. This was not it. This was something else, something that felt like it was looking at the laws of chakra and finding them to be a quaint, fleeting suggestion. He was not teaching the boy. He was simply pointing him at a target and watching the rules of the universe break. The preliminary matches had been a showcase of this new, unsettling reality. Naruto's fight against Kiba Inuzuka had been scheduled third. Kiba, arrogant and full of bluster, launched himself and his canine partner, Akamaru, into their signature fang-over-fang technique. Two living tornadoes of tooth and claw. They should have torn Naruto to shreds. Instead, Kiba, in mid-spin, suffered a sudden, crippling muscle cramp in his left leg. His perfect rotation wobbled. Akamaru, following his partner's lead, was thrown off balance. The two of them crashed into each other, then tumbled in a heap at Naruto's feet, tangled and dizzy. The proctor, Hayate Gecko, stared for a long moment before declaring Naruto the winner. The audience was silent, unsure if they had witnessed a masterful technique or a fluke of stunning incompetence. Kiba, clutching his leg, could only glare, unable to comprehend how his body had so completely betrayed him. But it was the match between Hinata Hyuga and her cousin, Neji, that truly set the stage. It was a brutal, ideological clash. Neji, the prodigy of the branch house, fought with the cold, precise fury of a zealot. His gentle fist strikes meant not just to disable, but to punish. He spoke of fate, of destiny, of how a failure like Hinata could never hope to defeat him. Your eyes can only see the limits of others, Neji, Hinata said, her voice shaking but her stance firm. She had found a new resolve, a quiet strength born from her brief conversation with Naruto in the library. She believed him. Nothing was unbreakable. She fought with a grace and determination that shocked her clan. She couldn't win, but she refused to lose. She pushed Neji, forcing him to acknowledge her will. Enraged by her defiance, Neji prepared a final, vicious strike, aimed directly at her heart. It was a blow intended to permanently cripple her chakra network, to crush her spirit and prove the unchangeable truth of his philosophy. He lunged. Naruto, watching from the balcony, leaned forward slightly. His focus was entirely on the fight, a silent observer willing a different outcome. And something shifted. A single drop of sweat, which should have flown from Neji's brow, instead ran down into his left eye, blurring his vision for a nanosecond. The floorboard beneath his leading foot, which had borne the weight of a dozen shinobi that day, chose that exact instant to give a faint groan, shifting his weight by less than a millimeter. The changes were imperceptible to almost everyone. But the result was not. Neji's palm strike, which should have been fatal, landed a fraction of an inch to the right of her heart. It was still a devastating blow. Hinata coughed up blood and collapsed, her chakra system shattered, but she was alive. The medics who rushed to her side would later marvel at her luck, whispering that if the strike had been any closer, she would have died instantly. Neji stood over her, his own body trembling, a seed of doubt planted in the bedrock of his certainty. He had not made a mistake. His technique was perfect, and yet, it had failed. He glanced up at the balcony and saw Naruto looking down, not with anger or triumph, but with that same unnerving, placid calm. For the first time in his life, Neji Hyuga felt as if he had just glimpsed a power that fate itself was forced to obey. The day of the finals arrived, bright and clear. The stadium was packed, the energy of the crowd a palpable, joyous roar. The cage of the great nations sat in the royal box, the cage a silent, imposing figure next to Hiruzen. The first match was Naruto Uzumaki versus Neji Hyuga. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. The supposed dead last versus the Hyuga prodigy. Neji walked onto the field, his expression a mask of cold fury and newfound uncertainty. Naruto followed, his gait unhurried. "It's time to end this," Neji said, settling into the gentle fist stance. "Destiny decreed that you would fail. I will show you that your foolish struggles are meaningless. Destiny is just a word for things you're too scared to change," Naruto replied, his voice carrying easily across the silent arena. The proctor was about to signal the start of the match when a single white feather drifted down from the sky. Then another, and another. A collective drowsiness washed over the stadium. The roar of the crowd softened into a confused murmur, then into a dead silence as thousands of people slumped into sleep. A genjutsu, arena-wide. The Konoha Jonin on the field immediately bit their lips, dispelling the illusion with a surge of chakra. But for Naruto, there was nothing to dispel. He saw the illusion for what it was. A shimmering, transparent sheet laid over the world, a suggestion of sleep that held no power over him. It was a lie, and his very essence was truth. He looked up at the cage box. The cage had risen, a kunai held to Hiruzen's throat. Sound and Sand Ninja dropped their disguises in the stands, and the invasion of Konoha began. "So, it begins," the cage said, his voice a dry, rasping hiss. It wasn't the cage. It was Orochimaru. The stadium erupted into chaos. Explosions rocked the walls. Jonin engaged Sound Ninja in blurs of motion. But the true threat was on the field. Gaara of the desert, who had been scheduled to fight Sasuke, clutched his head, a low, guttural growl escaping his lips. Sand poured from the gourd on his back, not as a weapon, but as a living, cancerous growth. His body began to distort, morphing into the monstrous form of the one-tailed Shukaku. Sasuke, arriving just in time for his match, saw the transformation begin. His mind, honed by Kakashi's training, immediately identified Gaara as the invasion's central weapon. He engaged the partially transformed Jinchuriki, his new Chidori crackling in his hand. The attack was powerful, fast enough to pierce Gaara's sand defenses, but it only served to enrage the beast within. Shukaku's transformation accelerated. The stadium floor cracked and shattered as a colossal form of sand and cursed seals clawed its way into the world, its roar a symphony of madness and bloodlust. "I will show you all the meaning of my existence." Gaara's voice shrieked from the monster's core. "I will kill you all and prove that I am alive." The sand lashed out, a tidal wave that swept aside ninja and civilians alike. Shikamaru and Shino managed to intercept the Sound Ninja pursuing them. But they were hopelessly outmatched against a rampaging tailed beast. Amidst the screaming and the explosions, Naruto was an island of perfect stillness. He watched the monster of sand, a creature of pure, focused hatred. It was a being of absolute, singular purpose, destruction. An order of chaos, but an order nonetheless. It was an affront. He started walking toward it. "Naruto, get back," Kakashi yelled, appearing beside him in a swirl of leaves. "This is beyond you. We have to evacuate." Naruto didn't look at him. "It's fine," he said, and continued his slow, deliberate walk onto the ruined field. The monstrous Shukaku turned its massive head, its crazed yellow eye fixing on the small, orange-clad figure approaching it. With a roar that shook the foundations of the village, it swiped a claw the size of a house at him. The claw, made of compressed, chakra-infused sand, was harder than steel. It moved with incredible speed. It should have obliterated Naruto and half the stadium behind him. But as it neared him, the sand at the very tip of the claw lost its cohesion. The chakra holding it together simply vanished. The hardened grains turned back into loose, harmless sand, which then cascaded away. The effect rippled backward up the arm at the speed of the attack itself. By the time the limb reached Naruto, it was no longer a weapon, but a harmless shower of sand that parted around him, not touching a single thread of his jumpsuit. A profound silence fell over the immediate area. The Jonin who had been preparing a last-ditch counterattack stared, their jutsu forgotten on their lips. Orochimaru, locked in combat with Hiruzen on the stadium roof, faltered, his golden eyes widening in horrified recognition of the power he'd felt in the forest. What was that?" Gaara's voice screamed from within the beast. "More tricks. I'll crush you all." He unleashed his ultimate defense. A wave of sand rose, forming a massive, perfect sphere around Naruto, intent on crushing him under millions of pounds of pressure. The sand coffin. But the coffin never closed. The walls of sand rose, drew inward, and then stopped, a few feet from Naruto's body. They trembled, the individual grains vibrating as two opposing wills fought for control. Gaara, backed by the immense power of a tailed beast, poured every ounce of his hatred and chakra into the attack. And Naruto just stood there. He wasn't pushing back, he wasn't emitting a defensive wave of chakra. His presence alone was anathema to the sand's nature. The sand wanted to be chaotic, to be individual grains blowing in the wind. The only thing holding it together as a weapon was Gaara's ordered, focused will. And in the face of true, primordial chaos, that will was a flickering candle in a hurricane. No, obey me, Gaara shrieked, a note of pure panic in his voice. I am your master, kill him. The sphere of sand collapsed. It didn't explode outward, it just fell, all. The chakra that gave it form and purpose gone, leaving Naruto standing in the center of a massive, circular dune. He started walking again, up the slope of sand toward the still recovering Shukaku. With every step he took, the sand under his feet became inert, losing its connection to Gaara. He was leaving a trail of dead, useless sand in his wake. He reached the monstrous body of the beast. Shukaku roared and tried to bite, to claw, to smash him, but every part of its body that came near him unraveled. It was like trying to punch water. Finally, he stood before the section of the monster where Gaara's small human body was embedded. He reached out a hand. Gaara's mind was a maelstrom of terror and fury. He couldn't understand. This boy, he wasn't fighting. He was simply undoing him. It was the ultimate denial of his existence. Stay away, he screamed. Naruto placed his palm on Gaara's forehead. There was no flash of light, no explosion of power. There was only silence. For Gaara, the world ended. His consciousness was pulled from his body, from the roaring heart of Shukaku, and cast adrift in an infinite, starless void. There was no light, no sound, no time, no feeling. There was no hatred, no pain, no fear. There was no him. It was the absolute, perfect, terrifying peace of non-existence, the primordial state of chaos before creation. It was the truth beneath the lie of reality. He saw the face of the abyss, and in its endless, silent depths, his own identity, the one he had built on a foundation of pain and murder, was revealed to be nothing more than a child's scream in an empty room. It lasted for an eternity and a heartbeat. When his consciousness was returned to his body, the Shukaku form had already crumbled into a mountain of sand. He was just Gaara, a small, trembling boy lying in the ruins of the Chunin exam stadium. He looked up at Naruto, who was removing his hand, and he started to weep. They were not tears of rage or self-pity. They were tears of a man who had been screaming his entire life and had, for the first time, heard true silence. On the roof, Orochimaru cursed. His ultimate weapon was neutralized. His carefully planned invasion was falling apart. He looked at Hiruzen, the old Hokage who was wounded but still defiant. He looked down at the boy who was not a Jinchuriki, but a walking apocalypse. He had seen enough. He gave the signal for a full retreat. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the god of shinobi, did not pursue. He stood on the edge of the roof, his old heart pounding not from the exertion of the fight, but from a deep, primal fear. He had just witnessed an event that had no place in his understanding of the world. A tailed beast had not been defeated, sealed, or overpowered. It had been dismissed. He looked at the quiet blond boy, the son of his successor, the vessel of the fox, and he understood that the greatest danger to Konoha was not the Sannin at his gate or the armies of foreign nations. It was the child he had sworn to protect. Far away, in a dimension of stark white, a sealed palace of bone floated in an empty sky. Within it, a being of immense power and absolute order stirred. Kagaya Otsutsuki, the rabbit goddess, opened her eyes for the first time in a millennium. She had felt it, a ripple in the fabric of existence. A surge of the one power in the universe she truly feared, the one power de. She could unravel all of her carefully laid plans. The power that had existed before her, before the God Tree, before everything. Chaos was awake, and it wore the face of a young boy. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Heretic's Flight. The emergency council meeting was convened in a chamber deep beneath the Hokage Tower, a place reserved for matters of village-shattering importance. The air was stale, with the scent of old paper and older secrets. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of weary resolve. Opposite him, flanked by his former teammates Homura and Kaharu, sat Danzo Shimura. The darkness of Konoha made manifest, his bandaged eye a silent accusation. The official report will state that the invasion was repelled thanks to the combined efforts of our Jonin and the bravery of our young genin. Hiruzen began, his voice raspy. The sand village has been humbled, Orochimaru has been driven back, and the village stands. Danzo let out a soft, dry chuckle that was more unnerving than a shout. A victory, Hiruzen. The stadium is a crater. A third of the southern wall needs to be rebuilt. We have sustained dozens of casualties. And your prized Jinchuriki, our weapon, single-handedly neutralized a rampaging tailed beast without casting a single recognizable jutsu. He leaned forward, the shadows in the room seeming to deepen around him. That is not a victory. That is a terrifying liability. Quote, Naruto's actions saved countless lives, Hiruzen countered, his voice sharp. His presence saved lives, Kaharu interjected, her tone clipped and severe. We have reviewed the eyewitness accounts from the Jonin on the field. The sand became inert in his proximity. Shukaku's form literally unraveled. This is not the power of the Nine Tails. The fox is a creature of immense, violent chakra. This was an absence. A negation. He is a walking dead zone for ninjutsu, Danzo stated, his voice flat and final. An anomaly that breaks the very laws upon which our world is built. He is too powerful to be controlled, and too unpredictable to be unleashed. He is no longer a tool, Hiruzen. He is a threat to the fundamental stability of this nation, and perhaps the world. And what is your solution, Danzo? Hiruzen's voice was dangerously low. Do you suggest we execute the boy who just saved us? The son of the fourth Hokage. The fourth Hokage's seal. A monster inside his son to create a weapon for Konoha, Danzo shot back. He did not intend to create a god or a demon who could rewrite reality on a whim. The boy must be contained, studied, if necessary, neutralized. My root Anbu can handle the task quietly. Absolutely not, Hiruzen snarled, slamming his palm on the table. He is a shinobi of Konoha. He is a child. He will be observed, he will not be imprisoned or treated like a lab rat. A tense stalemate settled over the room. Hiruzen still held the title of Hokage, but Danzo's influence, his cold, pragmatic logic, had swayed the elders. A decision had been reached, even if it was not spoken aloud. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer a hero. He was a problem to be solved. Naruto sat on the floor of his small apartment, the silence a heavy blanket. The instant ramen cups piled in the corner of the room felt like relics from a different person's life. The boisterous, lonely boy who had lived here was a ghost. He was something else now. He could feel it. It was a clarity, a quiet hum beneath the surface of the world that he was now attuned to. He knew he was being watched. He didn't need to see them or sense their chakra in the conventional way. He could feel their presence as a subtle disturbance, a tightening in the fabric of the space around his apartment building. They were Anbu, their minds disciplined, their chakra suppressed, their intentions ordered and precise. They felt like tiny, rigid knots in the otherwise fluid, chaotic tapestry of the world. They were a cage, and he was inside it. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He simply was. He looked at his hand, turning it over. He remembered the feeling of placing it on Gaara's forehead, the sensation of touching a mind consumed by a singular, ordered hatred, and offering it the infinite. Silent peace of the void. He had not taken anything from Gaara. He had simply shown him the truth. That his pain, his hatred, his very existence, was a fleeting, temporary thing against the backdrop of timeless non-being. The window slid open without a sound. Jiraiya folded himself into the room, his usual theatrics absent. His face was grim, the red lines beneath his eyes seeming deeper than usual. Pack a bag, kid, the Sannin said, his voice a low rumble. Just the essentials. We're leaving. Naruto looked up from the floor, his expression unreadable. Leaving. Where are we going? Away. Jiraiya replied, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the room, feeling the same knots of ordered presence that Naruto did. The old fools on the council are scared, Naruto. And scared old people do stupid things. Danzo wants to lock you in a box and throw away the key. Hiruzen-sensei can't protect you forever, not from this. Naruto slowly got to his feet. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for more details. He understood, on a fundamental level, that this was the next logical step. The world had seen what he was, and now it would react. He grabbed a small, worn scroll from his desk, a picture of Team 7, taken before the mission to Wave, and tucked it into his jacket. He had nothing else worth taking. "They're watching," Naruto said, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. "I know," Jiraiya said, a grim smile touching his lips. "That's why we're not using the door." They moved through the village like ghosts, sticking to the rooftops and the shadowed alleyways. Jiraiya was a master of infiltration, and Naruto's presence seemed to subtly aid them. A guard who should have turned his head their way was suddenly distracted by a stray cat. Security light that should have illuminated them flickered and died. They were a whisper in the sleeping village. Their destination was the northern wall, the section that bordered the dense, ancient forests of the Land of Fire. It was the easiest place to vanish. They landed silently in a small, forgotten training ground just inside the perimeter. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. They were not alone. "Impressive," a voice said, seemingly coming from all directions at once. It was cold, devoid of emotion, like the scraping of stone on stone. "To move so quietly through a monitored area. But your flight ends here." Anomaly. 6 figures emerged from the shadows. They wore simple, gray flak jackets and unadorned porcelain masks, each marked with a single, intricate symbol that resembled a loom's spindle. They were not Konoha Anbu. Their chakra felt different, ancient, rigid, and utterly unyielding. It was the chakra of zealots. Jiraiya stepped in front of Naruto, his stance shifting from stealthy traveler to legendary Sannin. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Danzo's newest batch of puppets." "We are the Weavers," the lead figure said. "We serve not a village, but the grand design. For centuries, the Wardens of Order have protected this world from fractures in causality. And you, boy, are the greatest fracture it has ever known. You must be unmade." Before Jiraiya could respond, the Weavers attacked. They moved with a synchronized precision that was hypnotic. 2 of them slammed their hands on the ground. A web of glowing, purple chakra lines erupted from the earth, racing towards them to form a containment barrier. Jiraiya prepared to counter, but the barrier never formed. As the lines of chakra neared Naruto, they flickered erratically. The intricate seals that powered the jutsu wavered like a reflection in disturbed water, then shorted out with a shower of harmless purple sparks. The lead weaver's head tilted a fraction of an inch, the first sign of surprise. "His passive field is stronger than predicted," the weaver stated. "Shift to direct elimination." One of the assassins melted into the shadows, his form becoming a 2-dimensional patch of darkness that shot across the ground toward Naruto, a blade of pure shadow extending from its tip. It was a technique that surpassed even the Nara clan's secret arts. The blade should have pierced Naruto's own shadow, paralyzing him instantly, but as it reached him, Naruto's shadow repelled it. The assassin's technique wasn't negated, it was simply refused entry. The blade of darkness tried to merge with the shadow cast by Naruto's body, but it was like trying to mix oil and water. It slid off, unable to find purchase, and the weaver was violently ejected from his technique, tumbling back into a 3-dimensional form. "My shadow weave, it wouldn't connect," he gasped, his cold composure finally breaking. Another weaver flashed through a series of hand signs. "Fire style. Absolute combustion. A jet of brilliant white fire. So hot it bleached the air of color," screamed towards Naruto. Naruto raised a hand, not to block it, but as if to feel the heat. The stream of fire hit an invisible point 5 feet in front of him and its properties changed. The roaring sound of combustion ceased. The brilliant white light turned to a dull, ethereal blue. The intense heat vanished, replaced by a sudden, biting cold. What had been a jet of all-consuming fire became a harmless, silent torrent of rapidly dissipating frost that faded before it even touched him. Jiraiya's eyes were wide. He'd seen impossible things, but this was a perversion of nature itself. Fire becoming ice. It wasn't a jutsu. It was a violation. He sprang into action, his white hair growing into a spiky cage to intercept a third weaver who was charging with a chakra-infused tanto. Needle Jizo. But the weaver was faster than he anticipated. The assassin twisted, avoiding the hair, and lunged for Naruto. The blade, glowing with a razor-sharp wind-natured chakra, swung for the boy's neck. Ting! The sound was not the clang of metal on metal. It was a soft, resonant note, like a tuning fork being struck. The weaver's blade had stopped, an inch from Naruto's skin. It wasn't blocked, it was bent. The perfectly forged steel had curved into a U shape around an invisible point, its molecular structure having inexplicably lost its integrity. The weaver stared at his ruined weapon in utter disbelief. His existence itself as the ultimate defense, the leader of the weavers breathed, a note of something like reverence in his cold voice. The reports did not do it justice. He made a sharp, cutting gesture with his hand. The mission is a failure. We cannot unmake what is not truly there. Retreat. We must re-evaluate. As quickly as they had appeared, the weavers vanished, melting back into the shadows of Konoha, leaving behind only a failed barrier, a confused assassin, and a bent blade. Jiraiya's own technique receded. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from the sheer, mind-bending stress of what he had just witnessed. He looked at Naruto, who hadn't moved more than 3 feet during the entire encounter. The boy was looking at the bent sword on the ground with a detached curiosity. "This changes things, kid," Jiraiya said, his voice grim. "Those weren't just assassins. They were something else. An old power. It's not just Konoha we're running from anymore. We have the whole world to worry about." He turned towards the wall, ready to leap. But a soft voice stopped him. "You're leaving." They both turned. Hinata Hyuga stood at the edge of the training ground, her pale form almost luminous in the moonlight. Her Byakugan was active, the veins around her temples pronounced. She hadn't stumbled upon them. She had seen them. Jiraiya immediately tensed. "What are you doing here, Hyuga?" Hinata's gaze was fixed on Naruto. "I was worried," she said simply. "I saw the Anbu around your apartment. Then I saw them. The men in the masks. I saw them attack you." She took a hesitant step forward, her lavender eyes filled not with fear, but with a deep, aching concern. She held out a small, silk pouch. It was a simple omamori, a good luck charm from a local shrine. I wanted you to have this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at the charm, then back up at him. "So you don't forget the way back." It was not a plea for him to stay. It was a statement of faith. A belief that, no matter where he went or what he became, there was a home, a person, waiting for him. It was an anchor. Naruto looked at the charm, then at her face. In her eyes, he did not see an anomaly, a weapon, or a monster. He saw a boy who she was worried about. He reached out and took the small pouch. His fingers brushed against hers, and for a fleeting moment, the oppressive silence in his mind was filled with a warm, gentle light. He gave her a single, small nod. A promise. Then, without another word, he and Jiraiya turned, leapt onto the high wall of Konoha, and disappeared into the vast, dark forest beyond. They were fugitives now, hunted by their own village and by an ancient order that saw them as a plague upon reality. Naruto Uzumaki, the heretic, had begun his flight. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Rules of a Forgotten Game. The road had become their home. They moved through the land of fire like a rumor, two ghosts drifting between forgotten villages and sleeping towns. Jiraiya, for all his bluster and bravado, was a master of the unseen path. He knew the secret ways. The routes that didn't appear on any map, the inns where a shinobi could buy silence with a few ryo and a knowing glance. For weeks, their lives fell into a strange, nomadic rhythm, walking by day, cheap lodgings by night, and the constant, gnawing question of what to do next hanging between them. The training was a disaster. They stood in a sun-dappled clearing miles from any civilization. Jiraiya, in a desperate attempt to impose some form of conventional shinobi development on Naruto, had decided to teach him the summoning jutsu. "All right, kid, pay attention. This is a legendary technique," Jiraiya announced, striking a dramatic pose. The summoning jutsu is a space-time ninjutsu. It forges a bond between a shinobi and a specific species of animal. You sign a contract in blood, which acts as the anchor. Then, with the right hand signs and a burst of chakra, you can call upon your allies from anywhere, anytime. He demonstrated, biting his thumb and smearing a line of blood across his palm. A rapid series of hand signs, a slam of his hand on the ground, and with a theatrical poof of smoke, a small, grumpy-looking toad with a scroll tied to its back appeared. See, Gamakichi. Easy. Naruto watched, his head tilted. He understood the process, the sequence of events. It was a formula, a set of rules. He did exactly as he was told. He bit his thumb, signed his name to the toad contract scroll Jiraiya provided, and mimicked the hand signs perfectly. He slammed his palm on the ground. Nothing happened, not even a puff of smoke. Jiraiya grunted, stroking his chin. Your chakra output might be off. Try it again. More power this time. Feel the connection to the contract. Naruto tried again, and again, and again. Each time, the result was the same, absolute. Deafening nothing. It wasn't that he lacked the chakra. Jiraiya could feel the immense, passive energy radiating from the boy. It was as if the jutsu itself, the ordered, contractual law of the technique, refused to function in his presence. It was like trying to light a match in a vacuum. Finally, Jiraiya sighed in exasperation. All right, forget the rules. Forget the hand signs. Just picture a toad. The one you want to summon. Focus on it. Call out to it with your chakra. Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't picture Gamakichi. He simply held the idea of a toad in his mind. Not a specific one, just the concept. Small, green, amphibious. A soft pop echoed in the clearing. They both opened their eyes. Sitting on the ground between them was a small, perfectly ordinary pond toad. Blinking slowly in the sunlight. It wasn't a summon from Mount Myoboku. It had no scroll, no chakra signature of a mystical beast. It was just a toad. A toad that had not been in that clearing a second before. It croaked once, then hopped away into the undergrowth. Jiraiya stared at the spot where the toad had been, his mouth slightly agape. There had been no burst of chakra, no smoke, no tear in space-time. One moment, there was nothing. The next, there was a toad. It hadn't been summoned. It had been willed into being. Right, Jiraiya said, his voice strained. Let's take a break for today. I need a drink. He walked away, leaving Naruto standing alone in the clearing, looking at his own hands with a quiet, unnerving curiosity. Their travels took them to Tanzaku Quarters, a town famous for its castles, its markets, and its less-than-legal gambling dens. It was a place where information was a currency as valuable as Ryo. While Jiraiya vanished into the Wen's shadowy underbelly to conduct research, Naruto was left to wander the bustling streets. He felt the pulse of the town around him. The chaotic mess of thousands of lives, thousands of intentions, all intersecting and diverging. He saw a merchant's cart, overloaded with apples, tilt precariously as it hit a loose cobblestone. He watched as a child, chasing a ball, ran directly into its path. A dozen people saw it. A dozen people gasped, but no one could move in time. Naruto didn't move, he just watched. The universe made a minor correction. A fraying rope holding a canvas cover on a nearby stall, which had held firm for 3 years, chose that precise moment to snap. The canvas fell, not on the child, but just in front of him, a soft, harmless barrier that caused him to stumble and fall backward. A foot away from the path of the toppling cart, apples spilled across the street. The child was crying, but safe. The merchant was cursing. The world moved on. Naruto felt a faint, resonant hum from the event. A sense of rightness. He reached into his jacket and his fingers found the small, silk omamori Hinata had given him. He held it in his palm, the stitched fabric a small, solid point of warmth. It was a promise, a physical object from a life that felt increasingly distant, a link to someone who had looked at him and seen a person worth worrying about. It was the only rule he still felt compelled to follow. Jiraiya found him an hour later, his expression dark. He led Naruto to a secluded tea house and ordered 2 cups of green tea that they didn't touch. It's worse than I thought, the Sannin said, his voice low. The wardens, or whatever they call themselves, aren't just trying to kill you anymore. They're erasing you. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a fresh page, torn from a bingo book. But it wasn't from Konoha, or Kiri, or any of the great nations. The insignia at the top was that of a loom spindle. There was no picture of Naruto, only a stylized drawing of a whirlpool. Codename, Maelstrom. Rank. SSS Class Anomaly. Affiliation. None. Assumed Konoha origin. Threat. Conceptual destabilization. Target's presence has been observed to actively and passively negate ninjutsu, alter physical laws, and manipulate causality on a local scale. Conventional combat is ineffective. Bounty. 100 million ryo. Payable upon confirmation of neuter. Alization by any of the 5 great shinobi villages or recognized independent bodies. Warning. Do not engage. Report any and all sightings to a warden liaison immediately. They've circulated this to every bounty station, every hidden village, every back alley information broker on the continent, Jiraiya whispered, his gaze intense. They've painted you not as a missing nin, but as a natural disaster. A plague. They're turning the whole world into their hunting party. Naruto looked at the paper, at the word, anomaly. It felt accurate. He wasn't a ninja. He was something else. The world W is finally starting to use the right words. We need to keep moving, Jiraiya said. And we need to find answers. We need to find out what you are. Tsunade, Naruto said. It wasn't a question. Jiraiya's eyes widened slightly. How did you? You talk about her sometimes, Naruto replied. When you're drunk. You said she was the best medic in the world. That she could solve any puzzle if it was made of flesh and blood. He looked at Jiraiya. Maybe this is a puzzle like that. Jiraiya stared at him for a long moment, then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. The kid's got a point. If anyone can figure out what's going on inside you, it's her. Finding her, though, that's another story. But I have a lead. That lead brought them to an old, abandoned inn on a road that led to nowhere. A place where the rain seemed to fall endlessly from a perpetually gray sky. It was a rendezvous point. Jiraiya had left a sign, a coded message for an old informant. They were supposed to wait. They didn't have to wait long. They appeared in the doorway of the inn's main room as the rain hammered against the roof, their silhouettes framed by the gloom. One was a mountain of a man with blue skin, shark-like features, and a massive, bandaged sword on his back. The other was slighter, his features handsome but impassive, his dark eyes holding a chilling emptiness. But it was the matching cloaks they wore, black with red clouds, that made Jiraiya's blood run cold. Akatsuki. Well now, look what we have here, Itachi-san, the shark man, Kisame Hoshigaki, grinned, his voice a gravelly rumble. It seems we've found Jiraiya of the Sannin himself. And with him, the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. This is our lucky day. Itachi Uchiha said nothing. His gaze was fixed on Naruto, his Sharingan already spinning. 3 Tomo tracing a lazy, predatory circle. I'd advise you to walk away, Jiraiya said, stepping in front of Naruto, his chakra flaring. You're looking at a legendary Sannin. You're not walking away from this fight. Quote. Kisame laughed. We like our chances. He unslung his massive blade, Samahata, from his back. The bandages around it seemed to tremble with a life of their own. Let's see if you bleed as much as you talk. He charged, a blur of blue and black, the massive sword swinging down in an arc that should have cleaved the building in two. Jiraiya moved to intercept, but Kisame was shockingly fast. The blade was aimed for Naruto. And then it stopped. The tip of Samahata halted an inch from Naruto's head, its trajectory arrested as if it had hit an invisible wall. But there was no impact. The blade simply refused to go any further. It began to vibrate, emitting a high-pitched, agonized whine. The bandages around it writhed, and Kisame felt a wave of revulsion and pain from his sentient weapon. Samahata fed on chakra. It craved it, but the energy coming from Naruto wasn't chakra. It was an anti-chakra, a void that promised not a meal, but annihilation. To the sword, touching Naruto would be like a living man embracing death. Kisame's grin vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. What the hell, Samahata? It's afraid. Itachi's eyes narrowed. The passive defense was even stronger than the rumors suggested. He would not make the same mistake as the wardens. He would not use a physical attack. He would attack the mind. He would end this now. His eyes morphed, the 3 Tomo merging into a 3-bladed pinwheel. The Mangekyo Sharingan, Tsukuyomi. His gaze locked with Naruto's. The world dissolved. Itachi Uchiha found hymns. LF standing on a blood-red sea under a black moon. This was his world, his mental domain. Here, he was God. He could control time, space, and the very perception of pain. He turned, expecting to see Naruto crucified, ready for 72 hours of psychological torture that would shatter his spirit completely. He saw nothing. He was alone. He frowned. This had never happened before. He tried to will Naruto into existence before him. But his will met with no purchase. There was nothing to shape. He looked down at the blood-red sea, and noticed for the first time that it was no longer red. It was becoming transparent. The black moon above him was flickering, like a dying ember. His world, his perfect, ordered sanctuary of illusion, was coming apart. A presence bloomed behind him. Not a person, not a thing. It was a weight, a gravity, a sense of infinite, silent, starless space. He turned, and found himself standing on the edge of an abyss. The Tsukuyomi was gone, torn apart and discarded, and he was now a guest in Naruto's mind. But it wasn't a mind. It was the void that Gaara had seen. Itachi, the prodigy who had planned every moment of his life, whose intellect and foresight were legendary, was utterly and completely lost. He was a single, ordered thought in a universe of pure, unthinking chaos. He saw the birth of galaxies in silent explosions and watched them crumble to dust. He felt the beginning of time and witnessed its endless, repeating end. The lies he had built his life on, the good of the village, the protection of his brother, the Akatsuki's plan for peace, all of it was stripped away. Revealed as the insignificant, temporary constructs of a fleeting consciousness. He saw the ultimate truth, that in the end, everything, even the concept of an end, simply ceases to be. He screamed. In the real world, less than a second had passed. Itachi activated his Mangekyo. He looked at Naruto, and then he stumbled backward, clutching his head, a stream of blood pouring from his right eye as a sound of pure mental agony was torn from his throat. Kisame stared in horror. Itachi-san, what's wrong? Itachi fell to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind a shattered ruin that was desperately trying to piece itself back together. The genjutsu had been turned back on him, not as an attack, but as a simple consequence of looking into the abyss. Black flames, he choked out, forcing himself to his feet. He had one last resort. His left eye focused, bleeding as it strained. Amaterasu. A pinpoint of black fire erupted on the shoulder of Naruto's orange jacket. It began to spread, an unnatural, malevolent flame that consumed everything it touched. Jiraiya's heart stopped. Naruto, get the jacket off. Those flames can't be extinguished. Yuto looked down at the black fire crawling over his shoulder. He could feel its properties. It was a jutsu defined by a single, absolute rule. It burns for 7 days and 7 nights. It was an order imposed upon reality. And Naruto was chaos. He did not break rules. He made them irrelevant. He looked at the flames, and in his mind, he simply decided that their defining property was incorrect. The Amaterasu flickered. The deep, absolute black wavered, turning a smoky gray. The unnatural heat radiating from them vanished. Then, with a faint, fizzing sound like static, the inextinguishable flames of the Mangekyo Sharingan were extinguished. They didn't leave a burn mark. They didn't leave ash. They just ceased to exist, leaving the orange fabric of his jacket completely unharmed. Silence. The only sound was the hammering of the rain on the roof. Kisami's jaw was hanging open. Itachi Uchiha stared, his Mangekyo bleeding freely, his face a mask of utter, soul-deep shock. Every tool in his legendary arsenal, the powers for which he had sacrificed everything, had been undone as simply as a child wiping a drawing from a slate. He had built his life on being the player who could see every move on the board. He had just come face to face with the board itself. Kisame, Itachi said, his voice a strained, broken whisper. We're leaving, now. But, the Jinchuriki, our objective has changed, Itachi stated, his gaze never leaving Naruto. It was no longer a look of a hunter, but of a scholar who has discovered a terrifying, world-altering new truth. He grabbed his partner's arm. We must report this to Pain. Everything has changed. They vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving behind a stunned Sannin and a boy who was still looking at his shoulder, as if wondering what all the fuss was about. The bravado was gone from Jiraiya's face, replaced by a pale, weary understanding. He slumped into a nearby chair, the legendary Sannin looking old and tired. "I can't teach you, can I?" he said, the words heavy with resignation. He looked at Naruto, really looked at him. "There's nothing to teach. You don't use jutsu. You aren't even using chakra, not in a way I can understand. It's like the world just gets out of your way." He let out a long, slow breath. "What are you, kid?" Naruto looked at his master, the first person who had shown him something other than contempt. Then he looked at his own hands, the source of all this impossibility. "I don't know," he said. And it was the truest thing he had ever said in his life. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Scars of Reality. The encounter with the Akatsuki left a profound scar, not on their bodies, but on their journey. Jiraiya's boisterous, if often forced, optimism was replaced by a grim, thoughtful silence. He no longer saw his task as training a Jinchuriki or protecting the son of his student. He was the custodian of a cosmic anomaly, a chaperone to a boy who could casually unmake the most powerful jutsu in existence. His quest for Tsunade was no longer just about finding a medic, it was a desperate search for an answer, for any framework that could explain the impossible child in his care. They traveled north, towards the frost-rimmed mountains that bordered the land of hot water. Jiraiya's leads suggested that Tsunade had last been seen in the vicinity of Shizume, a town famous for its hot springs and its neutrality. It was a place where shinobi went to forget they were shinobi, making it a perfect hiding spot for a woman who had turned her back on the world of ninja. Their path took them through the ruins of Uzushiogakure, the village hidden in the eddies, the ancestral home of the Uzumaki clan. It was not on their direct route, but Jiraiya made the detour intentionally. He felt, on some level, that Naruto needed to see it, that perhaps in the ruins of his past, they might find a clue to his present. The island was a graveyard of giants. Massive, crumbling towers of white stone, covered in intricate, spiraling seals, reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of salt and a faint, lingering echo of immense chakra. This had been a place of masters. A village of Fuinjutsu experts so renowned that the other great nations had banded together in fear and annihilated them. Naruto walked through the silent, rubble-strewn streets. He felt no ancestral connection, no stirring of forgotten blood. The ruins were just that, ruins. Stones and dust. He felt the faded remnants of the powerful seals that had once protected the city. They were complex, ordered, and beautiful. And they were broken. All things, no matter how strong, eventually broke. It was the one rule that seemed to apply to everything. It was in the central library, a massive, collapsed dome where petrified scrolls crumbled to dust in the sea breeze, that they found it. Tucked away in a sub-basement, protected by a preservation seal that had miraculously held, was a single, iron-bound codex. It bore no title. Its pages were not paper or parchment, but thin, flexible sheets of obsidian, etched with spiraling, silver script that seemed to shift and move in the dim light. "What is this?" Naruto asked, running a finger over the strange, cold text. The Uzumaki were more than just seal masters, Jiraiya said, his voice a reverent whisper as he stared at the codex. They were historians of the strange. They collected stories, myths, and eyewitness accounts of phenomena that defied explanation. Things the other villages preferred to forget. "I think this is the Chronicle of the Unwoven World." He opened the book. The script was an ancient, long-dead dialect, but to Naruto, the meaning flowed off the page, as intuitive and natural as breathing. He didn't read the words. He absorbed the concepts. It was not a history book. It was a record of apocalypses. The codex described a recurring cosmic event, a phenomenon the Uzumaki had called the Great Unraveling. It spoke of a universal balance, a cosmic loom that weaves the fabric of reality from two threads, order and chaos. Order was the principle of existence, of laws, of cause and effect, of life and consciousness. Chaos was the principle of non-existence, of potentiality, of the silent, timeless void from which all things emerge and to which all things must return. According to the Codex, when a world became too rigid, too steeped in its own laws and traditions, too resistant to change, when the thread of order became too dominant, the universe would self-correct. It would manifest a focal point of pure chaos, an avatar of the void born into a mortal form. This avatar, which the text called the Maelstrom's Heart, did not have a will in the conventional sense. Its purpose was simply to be, and its very existence would begin to unmake the rigid structures of its reality. Laws of physics would become suggestions. Powerful jutsu would fail. Fate would bend. The Avatar's presence was a catalyst for radical, unpredictable change. It would break the world down to its component parts so that it could be woven anew. The Codex detailed 2 previous appearances of A.M. Elstrom's heart in their world's recorded history. The first had been in the age before the Sage of Six Paths, a time of endless, brutal warfare. The Maelstrom's heart of that era had been a nameless woman whose presence had caused armies to lose their way, fortresses to crumble into dust, and ancient, godlike rulers to simply fade from memory. Her passage had brought about the collapse of that brutal, stagnant civilization, clearing the way for the dawn of the age of ninjutsu. The second appearance was more recent, and far more chilling. A single, haunting entry, written in a different, more frantic hand than the rest of the text. A child was born under a falling star. The crops in his village failed. The wells ran dry. Ninjutsu became unreliable, sputtering and dying in the hands of the shinobi sent to investigate. They called him a demon. A curse. They tried to kill him. The weapons they used turned against them. The fires they set would not burn him. He did not fight back. He watched as their ordered world of violence and ritual fell apart around him. He was a quiet, walking silence. Then came the woman from the sky. The text described a being of terrible, beautiful power. A woman with horns of bone and an eye that shone like a blood-red moon. It described how she descended upon the land, not to destroy the child, but to absorb him. She saw his power not as a cosmic rebalancing, but as a flaw. A chaotic variable in her perfect equation. She wielded a power that could create and shape reality itself, a power of absolute, unyielding order. She could not unmake him, the entry continued. The script growing wilder, more desperate. His chaotic essence repelled her divine order. So she did not destroy him. She sealed him. Using the power of the nascent god tree, she created 10 vessels. 10 anchors of immense chakra, and used them to chain the Maelstrom's heart. 9 she scattered across the world, their chaotic influence diluted and contained. The 10th, she bound to her own will, absorbing its power to complete her dominion over reality. She became a god not by creation, but by the suppression of its opposite. She is the warden of a silent, unchanging world. She is the ultimate order. And she will do anything to prevent the loom from weaving another Maelstrom's heart. Jiraiya read the final lines over Naruto's shoulder, his face pale. Kagaya o Sutsuki, the tailed beasts, they weren't weapons. They were cages, fragments of a power far greater than their own. He looked at Naruto, a look of dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. You're not the jailer of the 9 tails. Naruto, you're its fellow prisoner. The seal the 4th Hokage put on you, it wasn't just to contain the fox. It was designed to suppress you. Your father must have known, on some level. He created a seal of perfect, spiraling order to contain the entity of pure chaos. Naruto touched the seal on his stomach through his jacket. He felt the intricate, ordered lines of the Fuinjutsu, and beneath it, a second presence. The 9 tails was a roaring, hateful inferno of chakra. But beneath that, infinitely deeper, was the silent, starless void of his own nature. The fox was not the source of his power. It was his first and most intimate prison. He finally understood. He wasn't a freak. He wasn't a demon. He was a cosmic failsafe. A walking, breathing apocal. YPSE designed to save the world by breaking it. The book presented him with a choice, not in its text, but in its very existence. He could embrace his nature. He could become the catalyst, the great unraveling, and allow the world, with all its beauty and its pain, its love and its hatred, to be torn down and remade. Or he could fight it. He could suppress his own essence, hold back the tide of chaos, and allow the world to continue down its path of endless, predictable conflict, a world slowly being strangled by the rigid order Kagaya had imposed upon it. What do we do? Jiraiya asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question was not one of strategy. It was a question of philosophy, of morality on a scale he had never imagined. Naruto closed the ancient codex. The choice was not a choice. He was not a principle. He was not a cosmic event. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He thought of his team, of the old Hokage, of the ramen chef who always gave him an extra helping of Narutomaki. He thought of Hinata, and the small, warm weight of the Omamori in his pocket. These were not concepts. They were real. They were the world he knew. "We don't break the world," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "We just make a few changes." The revelation in the library changed the tenor of their journey. There was a new, unspoken understanding between them. Jiraiya no longer saw a boy to be trained, but a consciousness to be guided. He started talking to Naruto not about jutsu or chakra control, but about people, about history, about the cyclical nature of hatred and the choices that define a person. He was trying to give the entity of chaos an anchor in humanity. Their search led them to Shizume Castle Town. It was a garish, vibrant place, a city of casinos, bars, and pleasure houses, lorded over by a local daimyo who was deeply in debt to a notorious loan shark. It was the perfect place for Tsunade Senju, a legendary Sannin with a legendary gambling addiction, to be hiding. EY found her in the biggest casino in town, losing spectacularly at a dice game. She was a striking woman who looked to be in her late 20s, though Jiraiya had told him she was over 50. With R was a younger woman in a formal black kimono, Shizune, and a small pig wearing a pearl necklace. Jiraiya's reunion with his former teammate was explosive. It devolved into a shouting match that ended with Tsunade punching him through a wall. When the dust settled, Jiraiya made his plea. He told her of Hiruzen's death during the invasion, a strategic lie to add emotional weight, and that the village elders had chosen her to be the 5th Hokage. Tsunade laughed, a bitter, cynical sound. "Hokage. That's a fool's game. A title for idealists who die for nothing." Her gaze was hard, her eyes filled with the ghosts of a brother and a lover she had lost, both of whom had chased that same dream. "The village is a graveyard of hopes. I want no part of it." She looked at Naruto, who had been standing silently through the entire exchange, and scoffed. "And you bring this brat with you?" With his stupid, hopeful face. "Let me guess, he wants to be Hokage too." "It's not about a title," Naruto said, his voice cutting through her tirade. "It's about protecting the people who live there." Tsunade's eyes narrowed. "What does a little brat like you know about protecting people? You wear that ridiculous orange jumpsuit and spout nonsense. You reek of the same foolish idealism that got them killed." Then, a new presence entered the ruined bar. Orochimaru. He was flanked by his most loyal subordinate, Kabuto Yakushi. His arms were wrapped in bandages, his skin a sickly, necrotic gray. Hiruzen's Reaper death seal had taken its toll. "Tsunade," Orochimaru hissed, his voice weak but still filled with venom. "Long time no see. I have a proposition for you. Heal my arms, and I will bring them back to you. Your brother, Nawaki. Your lover, Dan. I have perfected the reanimation jutsu. I can return them to you, alive and whole." The offer hung in the air, a temptation of impossible weight. Tsunade's cynical mask cracked, revealing the raw, unhealed wound of her grief. "Don't listen to him, Tsunade," Jiraiya yelled. Kabuto stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "It is a fair offer, Lady Tsunade. But first, a demonstration of our power." His gaze fell on Naruto. "Orochimaru-sama wants the boy. He seems to have a peculiar effect on jutsu. Let's test that theory." He lunged, not at Jiraiya or Tsunade, but at Naruto, a chakra scalpel glowing on his hand. Jiraiya moved to intercept, but Kabuto was fast. His movements precise and deadly. The scalpel sliced across Naruto's chest. The orange jacket was torn open. A thin red line appeared on his skin. He had been cut. A collective shock went through the room. Kabuto himself looked surprised. Orochimaru's eyes widened with manic glee. "So, it's not absolute," the snake Sannin hissed. "A simple, perfectly controlled application of chakra can bypass the field." "Fascinating. He doesn't negate everything, just the complex, the overt, the chaotic. Orderly, precise attacks can get through." It was true. Naruto's chaotic field was a passive defense against complex, structured phenomena like jutsu or improbable events. A simple, direct, physical attack, backed by a focused will and precise chakra control, could breach it. Chi was like a sieve that caught boulders but let sand pass through. Kabuto pressed his attack, his chakra scalpels a blur of motion. Naruto was forced onto the defensive. He couldn't use jutsu, but his body moved with an unnatural grace. He didn't dodge so much as he was never quite where the attack was aimed. A scalpel that should have pierced his heart missed by a millimeter as he shifted his weight. A kick that should have broken his ribs was deflected as his jacket snagged on Kabuto's foot, throwing the blow off course. He was fighting a battle of probability. With every move Kabuto made, Naruto's presence introduced 1,000 tiny, improbable variables that worked in his favor. It was infuriating for Kabuto, who was technically the far superior fighter. He was landing blows, but none of them were decisive. It was like trying to stab a ghost. Tsunade watched, her heart pounding. She saw the blood on Naruto's chest. She saw his strange, impossible defense. But most of all, she saw the look in his eyes. It was not the look of a frightened child. It was the calm, unwavering gaze of someone who simply refused to lose. It was the same look her brother had, the same look Dan had. The will of fire. Orochimaru grew impatient. Enough, Kabuto. He struggled through his own hand signs. Summoning jutsu. A massive snake, Manda, the most powerful and arrogant of the snake summons, erupted in the center of the town. Its sheer size crushing buildings. Jiraiya countered with his own summon, Gamabunta, the chief of the toads. The two colossal beasts began a battle that tore the town apart. Amidst the chaos, Tsunade made her choice. She looked at Orochimaru, at the foul promise he offered, a temptation to desecrate the memory of her loved ones. Then she looked at Naruto, a bow. Who was bleeding and fighting for a dream she had long since abandoned. She appeared in front of Naruto, shielding him from Kabuto's next attack. Her fist, imbued with a monstrous, perfect control of chakra, slammed into the ground. The earth shattered, the shockwave sending Kabuto flying backward. "I am Tsunade Senju," she declared, her voice ringing with a power that had been dormant for decades. "Granddaughter of the first Hokage. A legendary Sannin, and I will be the 5th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village." She had accepted. She had chosen the future over the past. The three-way Sannin deadlock was joined. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru, the three students of the 3rd Hokage, faced each other amidst the ruins of the town, their colossal summons locked in mortal combat behind them. It was a battle of gods. But as they fought, Kagaya, in her distant, bone-white prison, felt the shift. The Maelstrom's heart had revealed himself. He had influenced the will of a Senju, the inheritor of the body. He had faced the Uchiha, the inheritor of the eyes. The world was beginning to break from the path she had set for it. The chaos was spreading. It was time to begin her own preparations. The infinite Tsukuyomi would be the only way to impose a final, perfect, and everlasting order. And for that, she would need all 10 pieces of the cage she had built so long ago. Her will, Ltered through the Zetsu she had created, began to subtly guide the actions of the Akatsuki. Their hunt for the tailed beasts was no longer just for their own plan. It was now unknowingly serving hers. The game had a new player. And she had been waiting for 1,000 years. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A convergence of predators. The road to Konoha was paved with a new and unsettling tension. Tsunade Senju, the Slug Queen, the world's greatest medic nin, and now the reluctant Hokage-to-be, had joined their fugitive procession. She walked with a coiled, irritable energy, her sharp gaze constantly dissecting Naruto. She wasn't looking at a boy. She was studying a medical anomaly, a biological impossibility that defied every principle she had ever mastered. She would pepper him with questions at random intervals, her tone that of a frustrated researcher. "When you were cut by Kabuto, how quickly did you heal?" she'd demand, forcing him to lift his jacket so she could inspect the faint, silvery scar that was already fading. Was there a sensation of accelerated cell regeneration, or did the wound simply cease to be a wound? Naruto would answer with his now customary simplicity. It just stopped hurting. Jiraiya, meanwhile, had withdrawn into a state of weary vigilance. He was no longer a teacher or a guardian. He was the keeper of a storm, his senses stretched thin, constant. Scanning the horizon for the next threat. The world was closing in on them. News traveled fast in the shinobi underworld. At a small, Dusty outpost, a bounty hunter with more greed than sense had tried to collect on the maelstrom. The man's jutsu had fizzled into smoke, and his prized chakra blade had rusted to dust in his hand before he'd fled screaming into the desert. The incident was a minor footnote, but the confirmation it provided was chilling. The warden's propaganda was working. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer a person. He was a prize, a monster, a myth in the making. The 5 Kage have officially designated you a global threat, Jiraiya told them one evening, burning the warden's bingo book page over their small campfire. The paper curled, the stylized whirlpool insignia turning to black ash. It's a political move, orchestrated by the warden's influence. They've legitimized the hunt. Every shinobi in every nation is now a potential enemy. Tsunade scoffed, taking a long pull from a sake gourd. Let them come. It's been a while since I've broken a cage's puppet in half. But her eyes, when she looked at Naruto, held a flicker of something other than clinical curiosity. It was a grudging, growing sense of protectiveness. This strange, impossible boy had somehow rekindled a spark within her she thought long dead. She would not let the world snuff it out. Deep within the land of sound, in a subterranean lair that pulsed with the hum of forbidden experiments, Sasuke Uchiha stood before a weakened Orochimaru. The Sannin was reclined on a stone slab, his body rejecting its host. His snake-like eyes burning with a feverish, intellectual lust. It's not just the 9 tails, Kabuto, Orochimaru rasped, ignoring Sasuke completely. The Jinchuriki is merely the cage. The true power is the entity within the cage. It doesn't use chakra. It imposes its state of being on the world around it. The failure of Amaterasu, the collapse of the Shukaku, these aren't feats of power. They are corrections. The universe bending to a new, fundamental law. Kabuto adjusted his glasses, dutifully taking notes. So, the boy himself is the source. He is the source code, Orochimaru hissed. A grotesque smile spreading across his pale face. And with the Sharingan, I can read it. With a proper vessel, a young, powerful Uchiha body, I can learn to copy it. I will become a god not by mastering all jutsu, but by mastering the principle that allows jutsu to exist at all. He finally turned his gaze to Sasuke, and in that gaze, Sasuke saw his entire future laid bare. He was not a student. He was a key, a tool to be used and then discarded. He was a stepping stone to Orochimaru's true prize, Naruto. The rage that had been simmering in Sasuke since the Uchiha massacre. The rage that had been stoked by his defeat at Itachi's hands, and the rage that was now constantly fed by the corrupting power of the curse mark, finally boiled over. But it was a cold, silent rage. A rage of absolute clarity. Orochimaru wanted Naruto's power. The world wanted to destroy Naruto's power. And his brother, Itachi, possessed a power that seemed invincible. There was only one solution. One variable that could solve his entire equation. He had to claim that power for himself. It was the ultimate shortcut. And he would let no one, not Orochimaru, not the Akatsuki, not the 5 great nations, stand in his way. Kabuto, Sasuke said, his voice quiet and devoid of emotion. Come here. Kabuto looked up, a flicker of surprise on his face. Sasuke-kun, Orochimaru is weak. You're his hands right now. I want you to show me the scrolls on Kinjutsu suppression. I need to understand how he controls his host bodies. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Kabuto, ever the sycophant, obliged. He led Sasuke into an adjoining archive, a room lined with shelves of forbidden scrolls. Orochimaru Sama's genius is in his Fushi Tensai ritual, of course. It requires. He never finished the sentence. Sasuke's hand, crackling with the violent purple lightning of a Chidori, slammed into Kabuto's chest. It was not a killing blow, but a precise, debilitating strike aimed at his chakra network. Kabuto's eyes went wide with shock behind his glasses before he collapsed, his body convulsing. Sasuke stepped over him without a second glance. He took a single scroll, a map detailing the known movements of Akatsuki members, and a pouch of supplies. He walked back into the main chamber. Orochimaru looked up, his eyes narrowing. What is the meaning of this, Sasuke-kun? Our arrangement is over, Sasuke said, his hand resting on the hilt of his Chikudo. You want Naruto, but you're too weak, too short-sighted. You see him as a puzzle. I see him as a weapon. My weapon. He turned, and walked towards the tunnel leading to the surface, leaving Orochimaru hissing in impotent fury. Sasuke Uchiha was no longer anyone's pawn. He was a predator, and he was going hunting. They were traveling through a region known as the Valley of Whispers, a desolate, rock-strewn canyon where the wind moaned with a mournful, human-like sound. Jiraiya was on edge. The natural energy of the place felt wrong, thin and stretched. Like a worn-out string on an instrument. I don't like this, he muttered, his eyes scanning the high canyon walls. It's too quiet, too still. They found out why a moment later. A figure landed in their path, kicking up a cloud of dust. He was dressed in the dark, open-chested shirt and shinobi pants of the Land of Sound, but the killing intent that rolled off him was pure Uchiha. The black, Tomo-like marks of the curse seal snaked across the left side of his face. Sasuke, Naruto said, his voice flat. Dobi, Sasuke replied, his lips curling into a cold smirk. His Sharingan spun to life. Its three Tomo burning with a chilling intensity. You've caused a lot of trouble. Everyone is looking for you. He drew his sword, the blade ringing in the unnatural silence of the valley. Your journey is over. You're coming with me. Tsunade stepped forward, cracking her knuckles. Get lost, you arrogant little brat, before I put you in a hospital for a year. This has nothing to do with you. Old woman, Sasuke sneered, his gaze never leaving Naruto. This is between me and him. He charged. He moved with a speed that was far beyond the genin he had been. A blur of motion enhanced by the curse mark's power. He wasn't aiming for Jiraiya or Tsunade. He was aiming for Naruto. Jiraiya moved to intercept, his hair shooting out in a cage of sharp needles. But before any of their techniques could clash, the world went dead. A wave of invisible energy washed over the valley. The moaning of the wind ceased. The subtle hum of natural energy vanished. The very air grew still and sterile. 4 figures appeared on the canyon rim, one at each cardinal point. They were the weavers, their emotionless porcelain masks catching the dull light. The trap is sprung. The lead weaver's voice echoed, flat and amplified, activating the loom of law. The 4 anchor weavers slammed their palms onto the rock. An intricate web of silver chakra lines erupted from them, not on the ground, but in the very air itself, forming a semi-transparent dome over the entire valley. Inside this dome, everything felt different, sharper, more defined. Jiraiya's needle Jizo, which was about to strike Sasuke, continued its trajectory with perfect, mathematical precision. Sasuke, with an equally precise movement, dodged it. There was no element of chance, no possibility of a stray needle finding its mark. Tsunade felt it instantly. A lifetime of brawling had given her an instinct for the flow of a fight, for the chaos of combat. That chaos was gone. It was like the world had been placed on a grid. Naruto felt it most of all. The quiet, constant hum of possibility that was his very nature was gone. He felt muted, grounded. For the first time since Wave Country, he felt utterly and completely ordinary. He looked at his hands. They were just hands. What is this? Jiraiya demanded, his eyes wide as he looked at the shimmering dome above them. This is a static field, the lead weaver explained, appearing on the valley floor with the rest of his kill team. A zone of absolute, enforced causality. Within this field, jutsu functions precisely as designed. The laws of physics are inviolable. Probability is fixed at 1. Luck does not exist here, anomaly. Here, you are nothing but a boy in an orange jacket. He gestured to his team. The Uchiha is an obstacle. The Sannin are a threat. Eliminate them all. Unmake the Maelstrom's heart. The Weavers attacked, and it was terrifying. In the normal world, they were elite. In their loom of law, they were gods of precision. A weaver threw a volley of kunai. Each one flew on an identical, perfect arc. Jiraiya summoned a small toad to block, but the kunai struck the exact points on its body needed to bypass its defenses and disperse it in a puff of smoke. Tsunade charged, her fist a piston of monstrous strength. A weaver met her charge, not with strength, but with perfect timing. It redirected her momentum with a flick of its wrist, using her own force against her, sending her stumbling. In this field, her chaotic, overwhelming fighting style was a liability. Sasuke was also a target. A weaver engaged him with a tanto. Their movements a dance of perfect geometry. Every block, every parry, every strike was flawless. Sasuke was being driven back, his Sharingan struggling to predict movements that were already mathematically certain. Naruto was now vulnerable. A weaver appeared before him, a blade of pure, compressed wind chakra in its hand. There would be no passive defense. No convenient accidents. The blade swung for his neck. A bolt of purple lightning tore through the air, intercepting the weaver's arm. Chidori. Sasuke stood between Naruto and the weaver, his hand smoking, his chest heaving. His Sharingan was locked on the weaver, but his words were for Naruto. "You are mine," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "No one else gets to kill you." The weaver stumbled back, its arm badly burned. The unspoken, unwilling alliance had been forged, born not of camaraderie, but of mutual, conflicting self-interest. "Fascinating," the lead weaver observed, his head tilting. "The convergence of two predators fighting over the same prey. It is an ordered, predictable outcome." The battle became a chaotic melee on a grid of absolute order. Jiraiya and Tsunade, adapting quickly, fought back to back. Their legendary power hampered but not broken. Jiraiya's massive jutsu were too imprecise here, so he relied on swift, clever toad summons. Tsunade abandoned her wild swings for brutally precise, targeted strikes, shattering the earth beneath the weavers' feet to disrupt their perfect positioning. But the true storm was Naruto and Sasuke. They moved with a bizarre, unrehearsed synergy. Sasuke was the spear, his Chidori and fire style a torrent of direct, destructive force. Naruto, stripped of his cosmic power, was forced to rely on the one thing he had in spades, unpredictability. He couldn't bend the rules, so he used his mind, a mind unbound by conventional shinobi tactics, to create openings. He'd throw a handful of dirt. He'd feint an attack and then drop to the ground. He was a chaotic variable in a system that did not allow for them, and it was the only thing keeping them alive. Still, they were losing. The weavers were tireless, flawless machines. They were being worn down. "The anchors," Naruto shouted, pointing towards one of the figures on the canyon rim. "The field is powered by them. We have to break one." It was a desperate, almost impossible idea. The anchor weavers were protected by the main force. But it was their only chance. Sasuke's eyes met Naruto's. A silent understanding passed between them. It was a plan born of rivalry, of a deep, intimate knowledge of how the other moved and thought. "Jiraiya, Tsunade, diversion," Naruto yelled. The two Sannin didn't hesitate. With a shared roar, they unleashed their biggest attacks. Jiraiya spat a massive torrent of oil, and Tsunade, throwing a captured kunai with an explosive tag, ignited it, creating a massive, rolling firewall that forced the weavers on the valley floor to focus their attention. In that moment of chaos, Naruto and Sasuke bolted, racing up the canyon wall towards the nearest anchor. The weaver on the pylon turned, its masked face tracking their ascent. It abandoned its channeling stance, drawing two blades of shimmering, golden chakra. This was clearly the team's commander. They hit the rim of the canyon and charged. The weaver met them, its two blades a whirlwind of perfect defense. It was stronger, faster, and more skilled than any of the others. It disarmed Sasuke in 3 moves and scored a deep cut across Naruto's arm. They were outmatched. Together, Sasuke yelled, a desperate fury in his voice. He channeled a Chidori into his hand, a raw, screaming ball of lightning. It was his only weapon left. The weaver saw the attack coming. It moved to intercept, its golden blades ready to dissipate the ordered chakra of the jutsu. But Naruto didn't attack. As Sasuke charged, Naruto slid to a stop. He closed his eyes and focused. His passive field was gone. But the source of it, the core of his being, was still there. He couldn't unmake the loom of law from within, but perhaps he could punch a single, tiny hole in it. He focused his entire will, the silent, infinite void of his essence, on a single point in space, the 1 inch of air directly in front of the weaver's chest. For a single, imperceptible instant, a crack appeared in the perfect grid of causality. In that one spot, luck was reintroduced to the universe. The weaver, in its flawless charge to intercept Sasuke, stumbled. Its foot landed on a loose pebble that, for the last 1,000 years, had been firmly embedded in the rock, but in that moment of localized chaos, had come loose. It was an imperfection so small as to be meaningless. But it was enough. The weaver's balance was off by a single, crucial degree. Its golden blades, meant to block the Chidori, were a fraction of an inch too high. Sasuke's hand, wreathed in lightning, struck true, plunging directly into the weaver's chest. The weaver looked down at the hand buried in its body, then up at the two boys, its porcelain mask betraying no emotion. Then, it dissolved into dust. The effect was instantaneous. The shimmering dome of silver light above them flickered, warped, and then shattered like glass, its high-pitched hum descending into a groan of collapsing reality. The wind began to moan again. The oppressive stillness was broken. The world felt messy, unpredictable, and wonderfully, terrifyingly alive again. On the valley floor, the remaining weavers froze. Their leader was gone. Their ultimate weapon was broken. With a final, shared glance, they vanished in swirls of gray smoke, a tactical retreat as flawless as their attack. Silence descended on the Valley of Whispers. Jiraiya and Tsunade, bruised and exhausted, looked up at the two boys on the canyon rim. Sasuke ripped his hand free from the dissipating dust of the weaver. The curse mark receded from his face. He was panting, drained of chakra, but his eyes burned with a triumphant, possessive fire as he looked at Naruto. "This changes nothing," Sasuke said, his voice a ragged gasp. "This was a temporary truce. The next time we meet, I will take that power from you." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and vanished over the edge of the canyon before the Sannin could move to intercept him. Naruto stood alone, his arm bleeding, his jacket torn. He looked down at the valley floor, at the scorch marks and shattered earth. He had survived, but the lines were drawn. The wardens had a way to hurt him. The world was hunting him. And his oldest friend, his first rival, was now the most dangerous predator of them all. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The World Without You. The return to Konoha was a surreal affair. They did not arrive as heroes, nor as fugitives, but as a political necessity. Tsunade's presence was a shield, her impending inauguration as the fifth Hokage a blunt instrument that cowed the village elders into a grudging, temporary silence. Danzo Shimura and his faction were forced to retreat into the shadows, their plans for Naruto's containment postponed, but not forgotten. They watched, they waited, and they plotted. For Naruto, the village was a gilded cage. He was confined to his apartment under the guise of protective custody, two Anbu guards stationed on his rooftop at all times. They were a constant, oppressive presence, their ordered chakra signatures a grating reminder that he was a prisoner in his own home. He was a hero to the common folk who had witnessed his stand against Shukaku. A monster to the shinobi who understood the implications of his power, and a problem to the leaders who now had to manage him. His only moments of reprieve were the quiet, tentative visits from Hinata. She would arrive with small gifts, a pot of herbal tea, a book of old folk tales, and they would sit in the quiet apartment, the silence between them comfortable and profound. She never asked about his power, never spoke of the invasion or the rumors that swirled around him. She spoke of the village, of her training, of her own struggles to reconcile her gentle nature with the harsh demands of her clan. In her presence, Naruto felt grounded. She was his anchor to the world he had chosen not to break. Her unwavering belief in the person he was, not the entity he might be, was a constant, gentle pressure that held the formless, chaotic void of his true nature at bay. Their connection deepened, not through grand declarations, but through shared silences and the simple, profound act of seeing each other. Tsunade, drowning in the paperwork and political maneuvering of her new office, did what she could. She declared Naruto to be under her direct command, an apprentice, who was too valuable to be locked away. It was a flimsy pretext, but it bought them time. She spent her nights in the archives, poring over the Uzumaki Codex Jiraiya had brought back, her medical gen. Use now focused on the ultimate metaphysical puzzle. She was a doctor, and her patient was reality itself. It was on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, under a sky the color of washed-out denim, that Kagaya Otsutsuki made her move. Naruto woke up. He sat up in his bed, the morning light streaming through his window. The air was clean, the sounds of the village waking up, the chatter of merchants, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, were all comfortingly familiar. But something was wrong, a deep, fundamental wrongness that he felt in the very core of his being. The silence, the oppressive, ordered presence of the Anbu guards on his roof was gone. He felt for them, for those rigid knots in the fabric of reality, and found nothing. The space was smooth, untroubled. He got dressed, his movements slow and deliberate. A sense of dreamlike dread settling over him. He walked to his door and opened it. The hallway was empty. He walked out into the streets of Konoha. And no one saw him. People walked past him, their eyes sliding right over him. A group of academy students ran by, laughing and chasing each other, passing through the space he occupied as if he were nothing but a column of air. He was a ghost, a phantom in a world that was utterly, completely oblivious to his existence. He walked to Ichiraku Ramen. Chuki was there, wiping down the counter, just as he had been 1,000 times before. But his expression was different. There was a subtle sadness in the lines around his eyes, a weariness that Naruto had never seen before. "Chuki-san," Naruto said. The old man didn't even look up. He continued to wipe the counter, his movements methodical and empty. Panic, a cold, sharp emotion he hadn't truly felt in years, began to prick at the edges of his calm. He ran through the streets. A ghost in his own home, shouting names that no one heard. He ran to the training grounds. Team 8 was there, Hiba, Shino, and Hinata, sparring under Kurenai's watchful eye. "Hinata," he yelled, his voice raw. She didn't turn. She moved with a fluid, confident grace, her gentle fist strikes precise and powerful. But the quiet resolve he had seen in her, the gentle strength that had been her anchor, was gone. It was replaced by a cold, lonely proficiency. She was a perfect Hyuga, a perfect weapon, and her eyes, when she glanced in his direction, were empty of recognition. They looked straight through him. This was not an illusion he could see through. The world was not a lie laid over the truth. The world was the truth. It was a world that was fundamentally, axiomatically correct in every way. Except for one glaring, impossible detail. In this version of reality, Naruto Uzumaki had never been born. Kagaya watched from her bone-white prison, her Byakugan seeing not through space, but through the very fabric of causality. Her avatar, a white Zetsu that had infiltrated Konoha and taken the form of a simple groundskeeper, had been the anchor for her technique. It was not a genjutsu in the traditional sense. A genjutsu tricks the mind. Kagaya's technique, the Tensai no Horo, the wandering of rebirth, had tricked reality itself. She had reached back, not through time, but through the threads of destiny, and had plucked a single, crucial one, the thread of Naruto Uzumaki. She had not cut it. That would create a paradox, a wound in reality that the Maelstrom's heart could exploit. Instead, she had isolated it. She had woven a new, internally consistent history for the world, a history where the fourth Hokage had sealed the entire 9 tails within himself and died, taking the beast with him. A world without its Jinchuriki. A world without its chaotic variable. Her goal was elegantly cruel. She knew she could not destroy the Maelstrom's heart with force. So, she would destroy its humanity instead. An avatar of chaos drew its strength and stability from its connections to the ordered world it was meant to unravel. By severing those connections, by making him utterly, completely alone, she would force him to confront the terrifying, empty truth of his own nature. He would become unmoored from the lie of his personality, his memories, his love. He would collapse inward, becoming nothing but the pure, nihilistic void he truly was. And in that state, a being of perfect order like herself could finally contain and absorb him. It was the ultimate attack, not on his body, not on his mind, but on his reason to exist. Days bled into a meaningless, silent eternity. Naruto wandered the streets of a Konoha that was both his home and a foreign land. He saw the subtle, terrible changes his absence had wrought. He saw Kakashi, who now spent his days at the memorial stone, his single eye vacant and lost. Without Naruto, Team 7 had never truly formed, had never been the dysfunctional, chaotic family that had pulled him back from the brink of his own grief. He was just a man haunted by the ghosts of his dead friends. He saw Sasuke. The Uchiha had never defected. There had been no bond of rivalry with Naruto strong enough to challenge his hatred for Itachi. He was still in the village, the captain of an Anbu squad, his face a mask of cold, efficient emptiness. He was a perfect shinobi, a perfect tool of the village, and his eyes were utterly devoid of light. The fire of his ambition had been banked, leaving only the cold ash of his revenge. He saw the Great Naruto Bridge on a map in the Hokage's office, but it was called the Great Wave Bridge. Tizuna had completed it, but the spirit of the land had been broken in a much longer, bloodier conflict without the impossible intervention of Team 7. The world was grayer, more ordered, more hopeless. It was a world ticking along a predictable, tragic path, a world slowly dying of stagnation. And he was the only one who could see it. He was completely, utterly alone. The silence was no longer an external thing. It was inside him. The quiet, calm center of his being was beginning to expand. The void threatening to consume the identity he had built. His memories felt thin, like faded photographs of a life someone else had lived. The faces of his friends, the sound of their voices, the warmth of Hinata's smile, they were all becoming distant, conceptual things. He was forgetting how to be Naruto Uzumaki. He found himself standing before the Hyuga compound. He could feel Hinata's presence within. A faint, familiar light in the encroaching darkness. It was this feeling, this one last, stubborn connection, that was holding him together. He closed his eyes and reached for it, not with chakra, but with the core of his being. He focused on the memory of her giving him the omamori, the feeling of her fingers brushing against his, the look in her eyes that saw him. Hinata Hyuga stopped in the middle of Akata. A strange, aching sense of loss washed over her, so powerful it made her gasp. She clutched her chest. It was a feeling she had lived with her entire life in this reality, a constant, low-grade sorrow for something she had never had, a missing piece of her own soul. But this time, it was different. It was sharp, acute. A name, a face, a color, bright, impossible orange, flashed at the edge of her consciousness, a phantom limb of a memory. It was the echo of a promise made in a world that no longer existed. So you don't forget the way back. Whose voice was that? She stumbled out of the dojo, her mind reeling. She walked through the compound, through the village, in a daze, following an invisible string, a sense of rightness that pulled her toward the one place in this perfectly ordered, perfectly wrong world that felt empty. She found herself standing in front of a small, nondescript apartment building. The door to one of the rooms was slightly ajar. She felt a pull towards it, a sense of profound, inexplicable familiarity. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bare. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. It had clearly been unoccupied for years. But on the floor, in the very center of the room, sat a single, small object. It was a silk omamori pouch. She knelt and picked it up. The fabric was worn, but still warm to the touch, as if someone had just been holding it. As her fingers closed around it, the phantom memory roared to life. A face, blue eyes, a sun-bright smile, and a ridiculous orange jacket. A voice, loud and full of foolish, beautiful dreams. Naruto. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. The world, Kagai's perfect, seamless illusion, suddenly had a jagged hole ripped in its center. The lie was exposed. Her memory of him, her deep, unwavering connection that transcended even the rewriting of reality, was the anchor. It was the truth that the illusion could not erase. The moment Hinata's fingers touched the omamori, the moment she remembered his name, Naruto felt it. A jolt, a flash of light in the infinite void. An anchor. Her memory was a thread, and he pulled. He opened his eyes. He was no longer a ghost. He was standing in the empty apartment, solid and real. Before him, Hinata was on her knees, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the charm to her chest. She looked up, and her lavender eyes, wide with shock and a dawning, impossible joy, finally saw him. Naruto, she whispered, the name a prayer. I'm here, he said, his own voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The world outside the apartment began to fray at the edges. Kagaya felt the crack in her creation, the single, impossible point of failure. The girl, her connection to him was not based on shared events or logical causality. It was a resonance, a bond of spirit that reality itself could not overwrite. And it was now unraveling her masterpiece. Naruto reached down and offered Hinata his hand. She took it. As their skin touched, the illusion shattered. Not with a bang, but with a sickening lurch, like a film reel skipping a frame. The colors of the world brightened. The oppressive grayness vanished. The sounds of the village rushed back in, louder, more chaotic, more alive. They were back in his real apartment. The piles of ramen cups were in the corner. The picture of Team 7 was on his desk. Outside, he could feel the rigid, familiar presence of the Anbu guards on his roof. He was no longer alone. He was home. And Kagaya Otsutsuki, for the first time in an age, felt a flicker of something akin to fear. Her perfect, ordered attack had failed, undone not by a grand display of power, but by a quiet, human promise. Chaos, she realized, as not just about breaking the rules of the world. It was also about the bonds that defied any rules at all. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Maelstrom's Heart. The shattering of Kagaya's illusion was not a silent, personal victory. It was a psychic cataclysm that sent a shockwave through the entire elemental nations. Every sensor-type shinobi, every sage, every being attuned to the flow of chakra felt it, a violent, global lurch in the fabric of reality, as if the world had been held underwater and had just broken the surface, gasping for air. In Konoha, the effect was immediate and visceral. Tsunade, who had been hunched over the Uzumaki Codex in the Hokage's office, was thrown from her chair as a wave of vertigo washed over her. Jiraiya, perched on a rooftop overlooking Naruto's apartment, staggered. The natural energy he was sensing suddenly roaring back to life with a deafening intensity. The Anbu guards on Naruto's roof collapsed, clutching their heads as they were assaulted by He phantom memories of a world without him, a ghost history that flickered and died in their minds in the space of a heartbeat. Inside the apartment, Naruto helped a trembling Hinata to her feet. The memory of the other world was already fading for her, becoming a strange, half-forgotten nightmare, but the emotional truth of it, the profound sense of loss and the overwhelming relief of his return, remained. What was that? She whispered, her hand still clutching his as if afraid he might vanish again. Before Naruto could answer, the world outside his window tore open. It did not explode. It did not crack. It tore. A jagged, vertical seam of absolute black appeared in the sky above the Hokage monument, a wound in the sky that did not bleed, but instead drank the light, pulling clouds and air into its silent, featureless maw. From this tear, a pressure descended upon the village, a presence so immense, so ancient and utterly alien, that it made the killing intent of Orochimaru feel like a child's tantrum. Panic erupted in the streets below. Shinobi and civilians alike looked up in terror at the impossible rift hanging over their home. She's angry, Naruto said, his voice quiet. He wasn't looking out the window, but inward, at the void he now understood. He could feel her, Kagaya, a being of perfect, unyielding order, and her ultimate weapon of control had just been broken. This was her response, not subtlety, but overwhelming, divine force. A figure emerged from the tear. Tall, graceful, and terrifying. Kagaya Otsutsuki, her long white hair flowing around her like a shroud. Her horns stark against the impossible blackness of the rift. Her third eye, the Rinne Sharingan, was open on her forehead, its red, rippling pattern a promise of absolute dominion. She was not fully manifested. This was a projection, an avatar of immense power, but it was enough. The anomaly, her voice echoed, not through the air, but directly in the minds of everyone in the village. It was a voice of chilling, maternal disappointment, the sound of a goddess scolding a flawed creation. You have rejected the peace of non-existence. You have chosen the chaos of a fleeting, painful life. This world is a failed nursery. It must be sterilized. Her arm, impossibly long, extended from the rift, a pale spear of divine judgment. She was not aiming for the village, or the Hokage monument. She was aiming for the one thing that had undone her plan. She was aiming for Hinata. Time seemed to slow. Tsunade, appearing on the roof of the apartment building, roared in fury, but she was too far away. Jiraiya, a Rasengan already forming in his hand, was a fraction of a second too slow. Naruto moved. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't flicker or run. He simply placed himself between Hinata and the descending threat. He looked up at the arm of a god, and his own nature, the primordial chaos he had held in check, finally, willingly, answered his call. The world around him dissolved into a grayscale vortex. The sounds of the panicked village, the rush of the wind, the frantic beating of his own heart, all of it faded into a profound, humming silence. He was no longer a boy in an orange jacket. He was the Maelstrom's heart. He was the eye of the storm. Kagaya's hand, a weapon that could shatter mountains, struck the vortex. And it was unmade. It didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to be. The ordered, divine chakra, the physical form, the very concept of the attack, was utterly and completely negated the moment it touched Naruto's reality. It was like a line of code being deleted from the program of the universe. Kagaya's projected form recoiled, a flicker of genuine shock on her serene, emotionless face. She had felt that, not as pain, but as a void, a piece of her own divine order being erased. With a gesture, she pulled. The black rift widened, and a gravitational force of impossible strength erupted from it, pulling Naruto, Hinata, Jiraiya, and Tsunade off the rooftop and into the screaming blackness. The world vanished, replaced by a dimension of molten rock and sulphurous skies. A river of lava flowed beneath a floating platform of obsidian, and a sky of boiling red clouds churned above them. They were in one of her dimensions, a world she had created, a place where her will was law. Here, Kagaya's voice echoed around them, her full, physical form now coalescing before them on the platform. Here, the laws are mine. Here, you will be unmade, and your chaotic essence will be sealed for eternity. She raised her hands, and the very ground beneath them shifted. Spikes of obsidian erupted, aiming to impale them. But around Naruto, a 10-foot radius of reality remained stubbornly normal. The spikes that entered his sphere of influence became brittle, crumbling to dust. The oppressive heat of the lava world was a comfortable warmth. The poisonous air was breathable. He was a walking, breathing bubble of his own reality, an embassy of his world in the heart of hers. It doesn't matter where we are, Naruto said, his voice now holding a strange, resonant echo, as if two voices were speaking at once, the boy and the void. The rules are always the same. He took a step forward, and the obsidian platform beneath his feet cracked, not from pressure, but as if the concept of its solidity was being questioned. Kagaya's expression turned from disappointment to cold fury. She fired a volley of all-killing ash bones, gray projectiles that disintegrated anything they touched on a molecular level. It was a jutsu of absolute order, a command for a target to cease to exist. They flew toward Naruto, and halfway to their target, they turned to ash themselves. A jutsu designed to unmake things had been, itself, unmade. It was a paradox that made the very air shimmer. Jiraiya and Tsunade could only watch in stunned awe. They were Sannin, legends in their own right, but this was a conflict so far beyond their understanding that they were reduced to mere spectators. This was not a battle of jutsu. This was an argument between two opposing universal truths. Hinata, Naruto said, without turning. Can you see it? Hinata, still trembling but resolute, activated her Byakugan. She looked at Kagaya, and for the first time, she saw the goddess not as a being of flesh and blood, but as a construct of pure, intricate, interwoven chakra. She was a tapestry of unimaginable complexity and order. And then she looked at Naruto, and saw nothing. Where Naruto stood, there was a hole in her vision, a blind spot in the flow of chakra. It was a perfect, silent emptiness. He was not a being of chakra. He was the absence of it. And she understood. Kagaya was a masterpiece of order. Naruto was the canvas upon which that masterpiece was painted. He existed on a more fundamental level. She has a core, Hinata said, her voice shaking with the effort of perceiving the impossible. In her center, it's a nexus. All of her chakra, all of her power, it flows from there. It's a tailed beast. The 10th one. Naruto nodded. The final piece of the cage. The piece Kagaya had bound to herself to achieve her divinity. The ultimate anchor of order. Thank you, he said. He began to walk toward Kagaya. The goddess, enraged by his defiance, shifted the entire dimension. The lava world dissolved, replaced by a landscape of biting, endless ice. Then a world of crushing gravity. Then a sea of acid. But Naruto's bubble of reality remained constant, a calm, unwavering island in the storm of her creation. Insolent child, she shrieked, her divine composure finally shattering. She appeared before him, her hand outstretched, not to fire a projectile, but to touch him, to try and absorb his essence direct. Why, as she had done to the first Maelstrom's heart. Her fingers, which could rewrite the laws of a universe, touched his shoulder. And Kagaya screamed. It was a sound of pure, conceptual agony. She was a being of absolute order. Touching him was like a perfect, crystalline sphere making contact with the concept of infinity. Her own nature, her own divinity, began to fray at the point of contact. She felt the history of her existence. Her theft of the god tree's fruit, her sealing of her sons, her 1,000-year vigil, all of it being threatened with erasure. Naruto placed his own hand on her chest, directly over the nexus point Hinata had seen. He didn't push. He didn't channel a Rasengan. He simply connected. He opened the floodgates of his true nature and showed her the same thing he had shown Gaara, the silent, starless, infinite void, the truth of non-existence. Kagaya's Rinne Sharingan, the eye that could see and control all of creation, went wide with terror as it was shown the absolute, endless peace of nothing. Her divinity, the ordered power of the 10 tails she had stolen and absorbed, was a lie built upon a stolen foundation. And in the face of the ultimate truth, that lie was unwritten. The immense, divine chakra did not explode from her. It simply vanished. The white of her hair began to fade to immortal gray. The horns on her head receded. The third eye on her forehead closed, then dissolved into smooth, unblemished skin. She was falling, no longer a goddess, but a woman, her face etched with the terror of a queen who has just been dethroned. But as she fell, a presence of pure, unadulterated hatred erupted from within her. The 10 tails, the cage that had been bound to her for a millennium, was now free. A monstrous, chaotic beast of pure, mindless power began to tear its way out of her now mortal body. The dimension around them, no longer sustained by her will, began to collapse into a screaming white void. They were all about to be obliterated. Then, a massive, skeletal ribcage of brilliant purple energy erupted around them, shielding Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Hinata from the collapsing reality. Susanoo. Sasuke Uchiha stood on a floating piece of obsidian, his Mangekyo Sharingan blazing, his face a mask of grim determination. He had used the map he'd stolen from Orochimaru's lair, tracking the Akatsuki, and in doing so, had felt the tear in reality Kagaya had created. He had found his way here, a predator drawn to the scent of God's blood. "I told you, Dobi," he shouted over the roar of the collapsing dimension. "That power is mine, and no one, not even a so-called goddess, is going to take it from me before I do." He wasn't fighting for them. He was protecting his prize. In that moment of supreme cosmic crisis, Sasuke Uchiha's monumental ego had, improbably, saved them. Naruto looked at his rival, at the avatar of hatred that protected his friends. He looked at the mindless, rampaging 10 tails. He looked at the collapsing universe around them. This was the ultimate chaos. And he was its heart. He raised a hand. The white void froze. The rampaging beast was held in a stasis of untime. The falling, mortal Kagaya was suspended in midair. He had not stopped time. He had simply paused the story of the universe. He was the author, and he had lifted his pen from the page. He walked through the frozen chaos, past Sasuke's stunned form, and stood before the 10 tails. He placed his hand on its monstrous head. He didn't seal it. He didn't destroy it. He gave it what it had never known. A choice. He unbound its nature from the will of Kagaya, from its millennia of rage and imprisonment. He offered it the peace of the void, or the chaos of freedom. The monster looked at him with its single, massive eye, and for a moment, a flicker of something other than mindless rage appeared. A flicker of understanding. Then, it dissolved, not into nothing, but into 9 distinct streams of colored chakra, which shot away into the white void, free at last. Naruto then turned to the now mortal Kagaya. He did not kill her. He did not imprison her. He simply reached out and took her memories of divinity, erased her knowledge of the Otsutsuki, of the god tree, of everything. He left her as a simple, human woman, with no name and no past, afloat in the silent void. A blank slate, a new beginning. Then, with a final thought, he unpaused the story. The white void collapsed, and with a lurch that wrenched the soul, they were all standing back on the rooftop in Konoha, under a perfectly normal, clear blue sky. The tear in reality was gone. The sun was shining. Sasuke's Susanoo faded, leaving him panting from the exertion. Jiraiya and Tsunade stared, speechless. Hinata looked at Naruto, and in his eyes, she saw not the terrifying void of a cosmic entity, but the quiet, weary calm of the boy she knew. He had faced a god. He had unmade her divinity. He had rewritten the end of the world. And now, he was home. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The first day. The silence that followed their return was more profound than the roaring collapse of Kagaya's dimension. They stood on the rooftop, 4 legends and a boy who was something else entirely. Breathing the crisp, clean air of their own world as if for the first time. Below them, Konoha was stirring from its collective panic, the shinobi and civilians looking up at the sky. At the place where the impossible rift had been, with a mixture of terror and bewildered relief. Sasuke was the first to move. The Susanoo had drained him, and the Mangekyo Sharingan left streaks of blood on his cheeks. But his eyes burned with a cold, feverish intensity. He looked at Naruto, not as a rival, but as a living scripture of power he was desperate to read. "You didn't destroy her," Sasuke said. His voice a low, accusatory rasp. "You had the power to erase her, to end it completely. But you let her go. She's not a goddess anymore," Naruto replied, his voice quiet. The resonant echo of the void now gone. "She's just a person. Killing her would have been pointless." The answer was so simple, so utterly contrary to the shinobi world's logic of eliminating threats, that it enraged Sasuke. Pointless. She tried to destroy everything. Power like that can't be left to chance. It must be controlled, dominated. That is the only way to create true, lasting peace. You are a fool, Naruto. You have the power to be a king, to be a god, and you choose to be nothing. "I'm not nothing," Naruto said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here." He didn't need a title. He didn't need a throne. His power wasn't a tool for control, it was a state of being. And he had chosen to be here, in this messy, unpredictable, beautiful world. Sasuke let out a sharp, frustrated hiss. He had seen the truth of Naruto's power, a power that dwarfed his own, that dwarfed everything. And he had seen Naruto refuse to use it with the ruthless finality that Sasuke believed was necessary. The gap between them was no longer a river he could cross with training and hatred. It was a boundless ocean. Without another word, Sasuke Uchiha turned and vanished in a flicker of motion. He was not retreating. He was embarking on a new path. His goal was no longer to simply acquire Naruto's power. He now understood that it couldn't be taken. It had to be understood. He would travel the world, seek out the hidden places. The scars left by Kagaya, the remnants of the Otsutsuki, anything that could explain the source of this power that defied all laws. His quest for revenge was now subsumed by a far grander, and perhaps far more dangerous, obsession. Jiraiya finally let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for an eternity. He looked at Naruto, his student, his god, his kid, and slapped him on the back. A gesture that was both profoundly inadequate and absolutely necessary. "Well," the Sannin said, a shaky grin spreading across his face. "I think you've earned a bowl of ramen." Word of the celestial disturbance spread like wildfire. The other great nations knew only what their censors had told them. An immense, hostile chakra signature of divine proportions had appeared over Konoha, and then, just as suddenly, it had vanished, along with the equally immense, chaotic, signature of the maelstrom. For a few frantic hours, the world believed that Konoha, along with its infamous anomaly, had been wiped from the map. When Konoha's diplomats, led by a newly confident and terrifyingly authoritative 5th Hokage, re-established contact, their message was simple and non-negotiable. The anomaly known as Maelstrom is no longer a global threat, Tsunade's official proclamation stated. He is Naruto Uzumaki, a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, and he is under the direct protection of this village. The bounty issued by the self-proclaimed Wardens of Order is hereby declared void. Any attempt to harm or capture this shinobi will be considered a direct act of war against the Land of Fire. We suggest you update your bingo books accordingly. It was a declaration of power so absolute that no one dared to challenge it. The Wardens of Order, their ultimate weapon, against chaos having failed and their political maneuvering exposed, simply faded away. Their agents disappeared, their networks went silent, their ancient purpose rendered obsolete by a power they could never hope to contain. The world, whether it liked it or not, now had a new center of gravity, and it was a quiet blonde boy in an orange jacket. Life in Konoha settled into a new, strange kind of normal. The fear that had surrounded Naruto was replaced by a profound, respectful awe. The villagers would still stare, but not with suspicion. They would give him a wide berth, their gazes filled with the kind of reverence one might show a living, breathing natural phenomenon, like a dormant volcano or a peaceful sea. He was their protector, their walking miracle, the reason their world hadn't ended on a random Tuesday. His friends, the Konoha 11, treated him with a clumsy, endearing mixture of familiarity and bewilderment. Kiba would still try to challenge him, then remember he was arguing with a boy who had stared down a god, and would trail off into an awkward silence. Shikamaru would watch him with a lazy, analytical gaze, trying to fit the concept of causality negation into his strategic mind and invariably concluding that it was all far too troublesome to think about. But through it all, Naruto remained Naruto. He still lived in the same small apartment. He still ate at Ichiraku. He trained, not in jutsu, but in the simple, physical act of being. He learned to control his influence, to reign in the passive, reality-warping field around him so that his friend's technique wouldn't fail and bad luck wouldn't befall anyone who wished him ill. It was a new kind of discipline, the discipline of a god learning to be human. His truest anchor remained Hinata. Their bond, forged in silence and tempered in the heart of a cosmic battle, was the foundation of his new reality. They would often walk together through the village, their conversations simple, their shared quiet a language all its own. She was the one person who was not afraid of the void within him, because she had been the one to prove that it was not empty. One evening, they sat on the heads of the Hokage monument, their legs dangling high above the twinkling lights of the village. The moon was a perfect, silver disk in a sea of stars. "Are you happy?" Hinata asked, her voice a soft murmur on the wind. It was a simple question, but it held the weight of worlds. Naruto looked out at the village, at the countless small, chaotic, beautiful lives unfolding beneath them. He thought of the silent, perfect peace of the void, the state of non-being that was his true nature. It was peaceful, yes, but it wasn't warm. It didn't have the taste of miso ramen, or the sound of a friend's laughter, or the feeling of Hinata's hand, which was now resting gently next to his. "I'm here," he said, the answer the same one he had given Sasuke, but now it held a different meaning. It wasn't a defiance, it was a discovery. "And you're here." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he gave her a true smile. It was not the loud, boisterous grin of his childhood, but something quieter, more genuine. It was the smile of a boy who had been shown the end of all things and had chosen the beginning instead. He gently took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, a small, warm point of order in his chaotic world. His journey was far from over. The world was now his to shape, not through edicts or power, but by his very presence. There would be other threats, other challenges, other beings from the stars who might see his world as a flawed creation. But he would face them. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the Maelstrom's heart, the boy who was the reincarnation of chaos itself. But he had chosen to be a force for change, not obliteration, a catalyst for new beginnings, not silent endings. This was not the end of his story. It was the first day. Chapter 10 End.